Hello, HSS 405, Artificial Intelligence and Autonomy. I'm your instructor, Daniel Estrada, and this is the first lecture of our Unit 2 lecture series on free will. Remember, the point of these lectures is to discuss the long history of philosophical discussions around agency and autonomy, and to situate particular key debates in that history. So we set up a lot of the history in the first unit. I missed a lot of stuff, and my overview was totally inadequate, but that laid the sort of framework that we're building on. In this unit, we'll talk a little bit about free will, and then this is really to set up the final unit where we talk about AI and robotics, and we use a lot of the concepts and ideas developed in these first couple of units to machines and sort of issues in AI. So we're now talking about free will in these videos. Here's the little roadmap. Let me get my head out of the way. So here's the little roadmap that we're using to guide ourselves through this long discourse. So we've talked a little bit about Aristotle and these ancient views. We're skipping the medieval views. And we've spent a lot of time talking about these early modern scientific revolution and political revolution views. We're not going to talk about Descartes this time, although Descartes did say a lot about the will. We're not going to say too much about Descartes. We will talk a little bit about Kant, but we're not going to jump too far ahead. We're not going to talk about Turing yet. We're not going to even really talk about the systems view until the very end of this video. The free will debate is really a debate that arises out of tensions in the scientific revolution and tensions between Aristotle and scientific revolution. So this is where we're going to be sitting. I'll give a little more detailed discussion of the big picture view in just a second. But the lesson plan for this video, the structure of this video, is I want to first start by reviewing the views that we discussed in the first unit, the alive, mechanical, and conscious views, just to make sure that we're all on the same page going forward, because this will be important for understanding what we're doing in this unit. And then once we're all on the same page, I'll introduce the free will debate and the important positions in the free will debate, namely the determinist or the hard determinist perspective, libertarian view, and then the compatibilist perspective. I'll spend most of the time talking about compatibilism because that's the most popular view. I'll talk about Locke's compatibilism. I'll talk about Frankfurt's compatibilism, sort of a neo-Lockean view. I'll also talk about Kant. Kant thinks of himself as libertarian, and we'll maybe see to what extent he's a libertarian. At the end of the view, I'll talk a little bit about systems theory and how systems theory gives us maybe an alternative to the free will debate. The systems theory approach to freedom is going to be the subject of the third video in this lecture series. The next video will be on political autonomy, and we'll be drawing from Locke and Kant and some other discussions here to talk about the politics. But this video is all about the free will debate. So let me start by making sure that we're all on the same page and we're all feel comfortable with the material that was introduced in the first unit. So the point of the first unit was to introduce these big metaphysical theories. First of all, Aristotle's sort of classical view built around intrinsic purposes and essences, and then Newton's reductive, deterministic physical view, where everything is understood in terms of its simplest fundamental parts, and then these universal laws governing these parts. So I'll do a little bit more review in just a second, but the idea here is that this is a fundamental conflict, and the conflict between these views at the scientific revolution gives rise to three different perspectives on agency. One, that agents are alive, two, that agents are mechanical, and finally that agents are conscious. And we introduced these views in the first unit, sort of talked a little bit about what they mean. And these views are not necessarily incompatible. In fact, a lot of the philosophical discussion is about how compatible these things are. Can you explain living processes? Can you explain conscious processes in terms of mechanical processes? Must everything that's alive be conscious? What is the relationship between consciousness and living things? What is the relationship between consciousness and mechanical processes? These are all sort of, in some sense, they're still live debates. And resolving these debates really requires some kind of fundamental confrontation between Aristotle and Newton. Now, if you remember from Unit 1, I also introduced a third explanatory framework, metaphysical framework, the systems view. And we're going to pretend for most of this lecture, most of this video, that the systems view has not been articulated yet. And to some extent, Kant helps get us there. We'll talk a little bit about systems view at the end of this video. But what's important for this video to understand is that the free will debate is really an artifact of this classical tension between the Aristotelian and the Newtonian picture. Now, that doesn't mean that the free will debate doesn't happen before Newton, or that it doesn't have any relevance now. We will talk about different periods in this free will debate. So we'll start by talking about the ancient view and Aristotle's discussion about continence and incontinence, and then we'll talk a little bit about the sort of high church, or the official free will debate, which is really about the conflict between freedom and mechanism, and how that relates to responsibility. So this is where we'll go over the main free will discussion people here. There is a modern view, and we'll talk about it at the very end, and this is really thinking about complexity and organization and evolution. So we'll talk a little bit about Dennett. I don't remember if I put the Norbert Wiener slides in this deck, but that'll come up in the third video for sure. Okay. These next couple of slides are slides that you've already seen before from previous videos. Remember, we have these three views and explanation, where the ancient view, or the teleological view, the essentialist view, believes everything has these deep essences, and then they have an idealized end or goal or future state that they sort of try to achieve. This is the sort of ancient Aristotelian view, and this is the view that gets shattered, or at least attacked significantly, by the Newtonian mechanics in sort of the development of early physics. Like I said, we will talk a little bit about systems at the end, but the free will debate is really plays out as a tension between these first two views. So for most of this video, let's pretend the systems view doesn't exist yet. So remember, here's the slide for Aristotle. The acorn turns into the oak tree, because the oak tree is the end of the acorn. It's the telos of the acorn. It's the idealized final state. Not every acorn becomes an oak tree, but acorns sort of want to become an oak tree, or try to become an oak tree. If everything goes well for the acorn, it becomes an oak tree. So it's like developing into a good oak tree is part of what it means for an acorn to do well. Similarly, there's going to be a similar kind of trajectory for all kinds of things, including persons. Persons have an idealized final end, being a good person, being a virtuous person, and not every person becomes such a virtuous person, but we might have it as our goal. This is not just an ethical view, this is also a metaphysical view. It's an explanation of all kinds of things and how change works in the natural world. And this view of change gets significantly challenged by the Newtonian picture, the Newtonian mechanics, where Newtonian mechanics looks at everything in terms of these fundamental properties like mass, velocity, momentum, and reducing things to these fundamental properties, which are governed by universal laws, are supposed to be explanatory. You're supposed to be able to explain in a Newtonian picture all the changes that we see in the natural world in terms of these universal laws that are reductive to fundamental particles, to fundamental pieces, and then they're deterministic, that everything that happens in the future is governed by what happens in the past and these universal laws, right? So every state is necessitated by its previous state. So the Newtonian picture is kind of like this falling dominoes. Once you knock the first domino down, the last domino will inevitably fall. And it's this inevitability of the Newtonian deterministic framework that's really the threat that the free will debate is trying to get around. Now, we did, again, mention the systems view, but we're going to pretend like that doesn't exist yet. I just wanted to put that up there for convenience. Here's another view of the same table that we looked at earlier. This table right here is just rearranged and simplified a little bit into this table up here, where I'm going to talk for a few minutes about very abstract relationships between these views, and this might not make any sense, and it's okay if it doesn't make sense. You can just skip past this part. But my idea here is that this is sort of going forward in time from an older view to the more recent views, and the idea is that the alive view is the oldest view, and all of the other views sort of developed from this base. And the development is challenged by the scientific revolution. So this junction here is supposed to represent the scientific revolution. And the idea is that one response to the scientific revolution is to just embrace the kind of mechanical view and insist that agents are machines. This is sort of that science is right and that we should sort of trust the science to inform our metaphysics, sort of embracing the mechanical view. Not everyone's happy with that, and there's a couple of different ways to not be happy with that. So one way, which I'm characterizing as agents or souls, is a kind of negative or a negative reaction against the very possibility of a scientific revolution. So the agents or souls sort of rejects the scientific turn. In some ways, the agents or souls is a a maturation or a development of theoretical complexification of the Aristotelian picture. So you see this with someone like Thomas Aquinas developing in a religious or a spiritual domain the basic framework laid out by Aristotelian theory. So this sort of takes it in a direction independent of the science. So instead of embracing science fully, it's sort of rejecting science. But then there's this sort of middle path that seems very popular, which is to accept the scientific revolution. So the people who are arguing about consciousness are not hostile to the idea of mechanical explanations, but there's some position in the conscious view that it's not, mechanisms aren't enough, and you need some other kind of thing, maybe something internal like a essence or like a soul, but maybe that's something that's internal but can also be explained mechanistically. So the idea is that conscious subjects are not necessarily opposed to the mechanical subjects. In some sense, these two views are in serious dialogue, and for the benefit of the doubt, I'm giving the conscious subjects over to a general acceptance of the scientific revolution, but maybe that's not enough for explaining the mind, something like that. It's sort of a Cartesian view. But I'm calling both of these the sort of simple version. So scientific and parascientific just means like alongside the science, so not rejecting the science, but alongside the science. And the idea is that each of these views mature. So the computer view will eventually be a maturation of machines, and we'll talk about that in the final unit of the course. How mechanisms is a theoretical refinement of what it means to be a machine. And if we had more time this semester, we might also talk about how sociopolitical subjects are theoretical refinement of self-consciousness. We will talk a little bit about the political implications and political dimensions of agency and autonomy, but we won't have a whole lot of time to go into that. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next video. But this is the general sort of framework. This is not meant to bias you in one way or another. This is not meant to say that one is better than the other. It's sort of historically my idea of how this develops. Also, I should clarify that this is a sort of Western perspective on this. As we know from some of the student presentations in class, some of these views are very ancient as well. There have been materialist philosophers in Indian philosophy and ancient Indian philosophy since the ancient world. Same thing with philosophers in India who emphasize conscious experience as fundamental. So like all of these views are, when I say that the alive is the oldest view and these are modern views, I'm looking at this from a distinctly Western perspective, and that's not exactly fair to the positions fully understood. You can trace all of these views to some extent in the into the ancient world. But from a Western perspective, situating this as the scientific revolution is sort of convenient. So this is just my heuristic. Don't put too much stock in this heuristic. This is just how I'm organizing these views from a historical perspective. Hope that's helpful. Again, the free will debate is really a debate between these two views. These are simple views at the dawn of the scientific revolution. And this is, I'm not a big fan of the free will debate. So just a word of warning that the presentation here is kind of from a hostile audience, so take it with a grain of salt. But one of the reasons I don't like the free will debate is because I think it's anachronistic. I think it's the kind of debate that only arises from a rather old view of what science is and what freedom is, and I think that view is not necessary. In fact, I think it's optional. And so one of the reasons I don't like the free will debate is because I think that once you get bogged down into the debate, you don't have any good options, and the better thing to do with the debate is to avoid it entirely and sort of step around it. So we'll see how that goes. Okay. So I want to start, before we get into the official free will debate, I want to first think a little bit about how the sort of early origins of the free will debate, and this is going to look a little bit different from what you expect the free will debate to look like. This is from the ancient, from ancient ethics, and especially from Aristotle. We talked a little bit about this in the first video, or in maybe the second video, part 1 of Unit 1, where I go over Aristotle's view. So I go over the ethics at the very end of that video, and I'm tired by the end of that video, so it's not the best introduction, but you might remember that virtue ethics has this perspective that there's a sort of best way of doing things that's not just good and not just right, but sort of best or idealized. Right? This is the point of the teleology, is essentialist teleology, that there's some idealized end. And so for Aristotle, what's best is to do the things that help you realize your telos, help you realize your idealized end. Those are the virtues. The virtues are the best of their kind. I'm not going to review this too much. I just want to remind you of this because it'll be important for understanding how the ancient world thought about freedom and choice. So for Aristotle, the virtues are the best way that help you realize your idealized end, in the same way that like feeding an acorn, watering an acorn regularly and making sure it has good soil and so on, good access to sunlight, helps the acorn develop into a good, strong, healthy oak tree. And depriving it of these essential things will help it not develop into a good oak tree. Same thing for a person, giving a person a good education and access to food and friends and other sorts of resources help people develop into good people, develop into people with good habits, virtuous people, people who make good choices. For Aristotle, this is a feature of your character. But anyone can be virtuous, or you're not condemned to being a bad person, especially just because of the way you are. Remember, I just went over this briefly in the earlier video, but for Aristotle, and for a lot of ancient ethical views, what the virtuous thing is also the middle or moderate thing, right? So the golden mean, or the middle way. The idea is that virtue is a middle ground between two extremes. So for Aristotle, doing the right thing is figuring out what the extremes are, and then figuring out what the middle way is, and it's the middle way that's the virtuous way. The sort of Goldilocks view of ethics, where the mama bear's porridge is too cold, and the papa bear's porridge is too hot, and the baby bear's porridge is just right, and it's just right in the middle. So this is the general view of ethics. Again, I don't want to spend too much time reviewing this stuff, but it's important for understanding how the ancient world thought of freedom and choice, which is really about, can you actually select the proper, appropriate middle ground, right? So to what extent are you actually able to select doing the right thing? Let me start on this one. Right, to what extent can we actually behave virtuously? Right, so part of the challenge is that it's hard to do virtuous acts. It's hard to be virtuous. It's easy to be vicious, or to fail to be virtuous, to do the wrong thing. And so you might think that some vices, some ways of acting, are nevertheless natural to people, because being angry and getting into a fight, or maybe lusting after someone. These sorts of things you might think are part of our animal nature, and so it's right and natural that we act in these ways. But Aristotle, remember, thinks that we're not just rational, but we're not just animals, we're also rational animals, and so it's right and natural and proper for us to control our actions with reason. And the question is, to what extent can we actually do that? To what extent can I ignore my animal nature and maintain rational control, do what I know is best? So sometimes I'm tempted by there's a cake in the kitchen, and the cake is tempting me with its sugar, and I know it's going to taste good, and I know my animal brain is unable to resist the temptation of sugar. Like, once I start eating it, I just start shoving cake in my face. I also have a rational nature, and my rational nature knows from reading a lot of things and watching TV and so on. It knows that sugar is bad for you. It's bad for your health. It can give you a heart attack if you eat too much of it. It'll make you feel bad if you eat too much of it. If I eat too much cake, I'll have a stomach ache the next day, and so on. So I know all of these things rationally, but then I also have this animal drive to eat the cake. And the question is, am I actually able to control my passions, my desires, my animal desires? Is reason strong enough to control my animal desires or not? Am I able to act as I know I ought to, or will I inevitably succumb to passions if they become too strong? So in other words, can I control my behavior? This kind of question has been around for as long as human beings have been worrying about ethical issues, and it certainly existed before the scientific revolution. This kind of debate really is not about physics and limitations of physics. It's not about determinism in terms of physical causal law. if there's anything deterministic about it, it has to do with our essence as being humans, as our essence as being rational. You might think that we're not as rational as that whole metaphysics makes out, and that we often do just act like animals. Maybe, especially in mass, we act like animals or something like that. But the question here is not about physics. It's not about quantum physics doesn't change really these basic questions about whether we can really exert self-control. So this I got these slides mixed around, but so this comes up explicitly in Aristotle's discussion of the virtues. Remember, for the virtue ethics position, ethics is about your character, the kind of person that you are, and so Aristotle talks about different kinds of characters. Most obviously, the virtuous person is the person who does the right thing, does the right thing in the right way for the right reason, does it deliberately, but also does it as a matter of course, does it because that's the kind of person they are. So it's not hard for the virtuous person to do the right thing. The virtuous person is not conflicted about what the right thing is or why they should do it. They just sort of do the right thing. It seems to come naturally to the virtuous person. Now, Aristotle argues that it's best to be virtuous because it would be easiest for a person to act in ways that are best. Like, if I could easily do the right thing, if I didn't have to think too hard about it, that would be great. Unfortunately, I'm not usually a virtuous person like that. Unfortunately, right. So, if I was never tempted by cake, if I just didn't like cake, or if cake made me physically ill, or I was disgusted by cake, then it would be really easy not to eat cake. Then I would never have any trouble following the rules of not eating cake. Right. The problem with eating cake is not just that I shouldn't do it or that I know I shouldn't do it. It's that I want to do it. Is that even though I know rationally that I shouldn't eat the cake, physically I have a craving for the cake, and so there's this conflict in my character. Right. So for Aristotle, the virtuous character is the one who has no internal conflict. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily good, or maybe even that they tried to do it. Right. So Aristotle thinks that virtues are habits, and what you want to do is not just do the right thing, but do the right thing habitually in this virtuous way so that you don't have to think about it. And the best way of doing that is sort of like training yourself. So for instance, smoking is bad. People shouldn't smoke. Smoking is unhealthy. But some people do smoke, and they're in the process of trying to quit, and there's this conflict about, they want to stop smoking because they know rationally it's a bad thing, but they also have a craving for the nicotine, and so they want to smoke. But there's a lot of people who have never smoked at all, have never touched a cigarette, and so have no craving for cigarettes, and so have no problem whatsoever acting in a virtuous way of never smoking. Like, for some people that's a conflict, but for the virtuous people it just never comes up. It's just not an issue. Aristotle says if you have a choice, it would be better. It would be better to be the virtuous person who's never smoked and has no cravings than it would be to be the a person who's always struggling with their cravings. So, better to be the virtuous person. Virtuous person does the right thing in the right way for the right reasons, as a matter of course, with no conflict. The opposite of the virtuous person is the vicious person. So the opposite of virtue is a vice. The opposite of virtuous person is the vicious person. The vicious person is a person who not just does the wrong thing, but doesn't understand why it's the wrong thing, or even thinks that the wrong thing is the right thing. Right. So whereas the virtuous person does the right thing for the right reason, understands why it's the right thing, and does it immediately as a natural action, the vicious person doesn't understand what the right thing is, does the wrong thing, and has maybe even habituated themselves into doing the wrong thing naturally, so that it comes immediately, and so they immediately see the wrong thing to do, and they immediately see it as the right thing to do. Right. The problem for the vicious character is not just that they do the wrong thing, but that they don't understand what the difference between right and wrong, or even worse, that they think that the best thing to do is actually the wrong thing to do. So my example of this is a bank robber. Like, someone might think that robbing banks will make them rich, whereas in fact robbing banks is probably going to make you poor and get you put in jail, and you'll have a miserable life as a result of robbing banks. You shouldn't rob banks because it's not a good idea. And I really don't have any problem seeing that, because I understand why robbing banks is wrong, not just from like a legal perspective, but also from a practical perspective. Like, it puts you in a lot of risk and danger that you could easily avoid by just not robbing banks. But some people might just get it in their head that they need to rob a bank, and that's their ticket to the good life. And so someone who thinks that robbing banks is their ticket to the good life, they just have a mistaken belief about what the right thing to do is. So they go about doing the wrong thing. It's not because they want to do the wrong thing. It's because they don't know what the difference between, like, the person who wants to rob banks because they think it's a ticket to the good life. They want to live the good life, right? They want to realize their idealized ends, but they're just mistaken about the path that'll get them there. So that's the vicious character. The vicious character does the wrong thing. One of the tricks of the vicious character, though, is that they do the wrong thing naturally, in the same way that the virtuous character does the right thing naturally. The vicious character also does the wrong thing naturally. So someone who just just intuitively believes that robbing banks will be their ticket to the good life, and they sort of see everything through the lens of robbing banks as being a fundamental good, right? So this is the kind of vicious character. So these are the extremes. And Aristotle thinks it's better to be the virtuous character, but Aristotle also recognizes that most of us are not virtuous characters, especially because sometimes this stuff is lucky. Like if you were lucky to have never lived in a community of smokers, never been, like, your parents didn't smoke or anything, then maybe smoking is not very hard for you. But maybe some of us were not so lucky, and we have these cultural and social influences that make it more likely for us to smoke. And like maybe we don't really have a lot of control over that, especially someone who grew up in a household that smoked. So for those people, being a virtuous character is going to be very difficult, maybe more difficult than it would be for other people. So part of this is not just a matter of who you are, but it's also a matter of luck and the experiences that you had and so on. Aristotle recognizes all of that complexity. He's just sort of describing the possibilities. Virtuous and vicious characters are the extreme. Most of us are not in that extreme. Most of us, in fact, are what he calls a continent or an incontinent character. So continent just means capable. It means that you can do something. Nowadays, the word continent is mostly associated with are you able to go to the bathroom by yourself, or do you wet the bed? Especially for elderly people, might have struggle with continence or incontinence. Might need elderly diapers. So this is where the term gets used mostly today. But for Aristotle, continence is about just capability, and in particular, it's capability with respect to the virtues. So the virtuous person does the right thing in the right way for the right reason without internal conflict. But the continent and the incontinent character are both characters that experience conflict. The continent character experiences... So continent character knows what the right thing to do is. They're not mistaken about what the good thing to do is. They know what the right thing to do is, but it's hard for them to do the right thing. So again, the cigarette smoker who knows they shouldn't be smoking, but also has a strong craving to smoke. So the continent character has the craving to do the wrong thing, but knows what the right thing to do is, and after some amount of struggle, after some amount of internal conflict, the continent character does the right thing. They're actually capable and able to control their actions and do the right thing. And the incontinent character also knows what the right thing to do is, also is correct about the conception about what's right, but fails to act in the correct way. So the continent character is one who has the craving to smoke, but refuses to smoke and eventually quits smoking. But the incontinent character is the one who keeps lapsing back and falling off the wagon and starts smoking again. So this is really how the ancient issue with freedom and free will goes. Like, can we be continent? Can we be virtuous? Can we at least be continent? And you might be skeptical of this. You might think that there's something, in some situations, like someone kills your mother, that no one's character can be so virtuous as to not be overcome with rage and act out as a result of this, right? And so you might think that in that case, passions will always overcome someone's rational capacities, and they will always be incontinent in these sort of situations. Or maybe not, right? So the debate here is about just, are we able to do what's best, or will we succumb to these lower animal drives? Will I be able to maintain my diet or not? Again, notice that this is not a debate about metaphysical freedom. This is not a debate about physics. It's not a debate about the causal structure of the world. If anything, it's a debate about my nature versus my actions. But this is a debate that has its sources in the ancient world. Aristotle talks about it, and a lot of the Middle Ages philosophical discussion before the rise of science, before the scientific revolution, a lot of the Middle Ages discussion was wrapped up in these kinds of questions about the will, about reason versus passion. So see people like St. Augustine talks about this, and other Middle Ages people. Aquinas also talks about free will in these terms. Okay. But that all is the debate before the Newtonian picture comes around. So the Newtonian picture And the scientific revolution is really what changes the terms of the debate and sets up the free will debate as we sort of more popularly know it today. So just to distinguish these, I call the other one the classical or the ancient view, and this is the sort of modern or scientific view. So in the modern view, we reject the notion of essences, but instead we have these physical laws, or these universal physical laws that constrain the behavior of all things. And so you don't get the same teleological structure, but instead you have the issues with the reductive determinism, right? The physics seems to say that every state is determined by every previous state. So what happens next is entirely determined, necessitated by what happens before it. So that everything that happens happens according to these universal laws. And so the question is, well, to what extent can we be free if this is how the universe works? If the universe is this purely mechanical process where future events are determined by prior events, then to what extent can we be free? To what extent can we act freely? In the sense of self-control, in this same sense of self-control that was discussed by the ancient sort of discussion of continence and incontinence. But also just in terms of, can we violate the laws of do the laws of physics entirely determine everything that we do, or is it possible to describe free agents as transcending or evading or somehow otherwise escaping these mechanical descriptions or these deterministic physical descriptions? Now, this is why I want to bracket out the systems view that we'll talk about at the end of the video. Again, we're going to pretend for most of this discussion like the systems view doesn't exist, but the systems view is exactly there to deal with complexity, with chaos theory, and with the sort of emergent organizations that we now in science use quite often to describe how the world works. Modern contemporary science within the last 50 years or so, is a lot more comfortable with non-reductive, complex organizational explanations in terms of complexity, and this is quite different from the Newtonian view. This is one of the reasons I don't like the free will debate anymore, because I don't think it is accurate of the scientific perspective, because I don't think the Newtonian perspective is entirely the scientific perspective anymore. So part of the idea is that this is why it's anachronistic. It's dealing with debates and issues that are sort of the rest of science has moved past. But the point of this video, I keep trying to resist it, but the point of this video is to stay immersed in the scientific free will debate, right? So, to what extent is freedom compatible with mechanical descriptions? These deterministic descriptions. Maybe that's not the best science now, but during the scientific revolution, this was the perspective. This is what they were anticipating that science was offering. This reductive, deterministic scientific worldview. So the question is, can we be free in this situation? And more important than just freedom, can we be responsible for actions? What happens to ethics in a mechanical universe? Does ethics just go away? Is it just a dog-eat-dog universe? Is it maybe just an absurd, chaotic universe? To what extent can we actually control our actions? To what extent is it reasonable to hold people responsible for their actions in this new mechanistic paradigm, in this new mechanistic metaphysics? Okay, so we're going to start giving a bunch of different takes on this modern scientific debate over free will. I'll give a little bit of structure in a second, but a lot of the debates will be coming from this book. This book is from these four philosophers, and they each have a different position on the free will debate. So John Martin Fisher is a compatibilist, Robert Kane's a libertarian, Derek Pereboom is a is a determinist, and Manuel Vargas argues for a kind of a fourth view that we're not going to talk about in this video, but it's in the book. But one of the nice things about the book is that it not only lets each person present their view, but it also has each person respond to the views of everyone else, and then that person gives a response to all the responses. And so there's a nice little dialogue that happens between these views, and I think this is really important for understanding the different views, not just what are the views saying, but how are they responding and reacting to the other views. Again, we'll have this debate explicitly in class at the end of this unit, so this is a good resource for getting into the different views and how they're interacting. So in this book, Robert Kane, who's the libertarian of the group, says gives a kind of definition or sort of first start at the free will debate. So we believe we have free will when we view ourselves as agents capable of influencing the world in various ways. Open alternatives seem to lie before us. We reason and deliberate among them and choose. We feel, one, it is up to us what we choose and how we act. And this means that we have chosen or acted. This means we could have chosen or acted otherwise. As Aristotle says, when acting is up to us, so is not acting. This up to usness also suggests that, two, the ultimate sources of our actions lie in us and not outside us and factors beyond our control. The ultimate sources of our actions lie in us and not in outside factors beyond our control. So this is really the crucial issue for the free will debate, that we're the source of our actions and not something else. The will is free when we act the way we want to act, where our actions are up to us. You can see, I think, the echoes of the ancient debate over continence and incontinence. Right? The continence and incontinence is really, again, this debate over whether it's up to us. What changes in the modern scientific view is the challenge of up to usness being all of the evidence from Newtonian science. The physical world seems to be deterministic. And so the question is, are we actually part of that physical world? Are we somehow separate from the physical world or independent of the physical world? Like, if we are free, how does our freedom relate to the determinism that science seems to suggest describes the natural world? Again, maybe that determinism isn't the best description of science because we know quantum mechanics is non-deterministic. We know that even if it is deterministic, chaos theory means it's really hard to predict everything that happens. Maybe it's impossible to predict everything that happens, practically impossible to predict everything that happens. Again, I think the Newtonian view is not the best view here, but I'll stop fighting with myself. Okay, there's the crash course quick video on determinism and free will. There's a couple of other crash course videos in the slides. I'll let you watch those through the slides. But here's the setup for the free will debate. So we've talked a lot about mechanism, but it's really important. This is absolutely crucial for the free will debate, that it's not just about whether the universe is deterministic. The free will debate is not simply about whether the universe is deterministic. The free will debate is absolutely centrally about whether moral responsibility is compatible with a deterministic universe. So you might, right? It's not just is everything deterministic or not. For one thing, most philosophers are going to say that scientists are the ones, the physicists are the ones who are going to decide that, whether things are deterministic or not. Maybe quantum mechanics is non-deterministic, and so that seems to settle the issue. Right, but that's not the free will debate. It's not just if the universe is deterministic. The free will debate is really about whether moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. So moral responsibility are these questions about my relationship to my actions. Am I actually responsible for those actions? What kind of claim do I have to those actions, or what kind of association is there between myself and those actions? Am I the cause of the actions? Am I the source of the actions? So sometimes we talk about moral responsibility in terms of the source of the actions or the cause of the actions. Sometimes we talk about moral responsibility simply in terms of freedom generally, like was I acting freely, or could I have done otherwise? Right. So could I have done otherwise is not exactly the same thing as am I the source of my actions. And we'll talk exactly about what these different views mean. Another way of talking about moral responsibility is with this idea of ethical or moral desert. Desert, like that you deserve something. So do I deserve credit, or do I deserve blame for my actions? Like holding someone responsible for their actions might mean punishing them, might mean praising them or giving them an award. Responsibility here is both positive and negative. It's an interesting fact about the discourse that people tend to worry more about the negative dimensions of responsibility than the positive dimensions of responsibility, that people are more willing to change their actions based on negative consequences than based on positive consequences. So there's this sort of bias that people have towards negative responsibility, or avoiding negative responsibility. But this is another way of talking about responsibility. The upshot of all these things about source, about freedom, about desert, is these are moral notions. We're not just talking about causation, but we're talking about the association between an action and myself. To what extent can I be held responsible? To what extent can I be punished or blamed or praised? To what extent could I have done otherwise? Could I have acted differently? This bears on some physics issues and causation issues, but right, the idea is that it's moral responsibility on the one hand, and then the question is moral responsibility compatible with a deterministic universe? And the assumption in this debate is that what science tells us is that the universe is deterministic, and so determinism becomes a real problem for our ethical theories. Right, so determinism is just a view that all events are caused by prior events. This is just this Newtonian domino effect issue, right? So that all events are caused by prior events, so there's no uncaused events. There's no miracles, like God can't step in and cause events. Or even if God steps in and causes events, that's still not freedom. That's something else intervening. And again, the assumption here is that determinism represents the perspective of modern Newtonian science. And so if the worry, the threat is that if the science is correct and determinism is true, then we have to get rid of responsibility. And we can't hold, it doesn't make sense to hold people responsible. Right? Or on the inverse, if you think that moral responsibility is just a hard truth about the world, that people just are responsible for their actions, then maybe this gives you reason for being skeptical of the scientific theory of determinism. But remember, this is I'll keep stressing this because students seem to struggle with this every semester. The issue is not just, is determinism true? The issue is fundamentally about whether moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. Sorry. The moral responsibility is compatible with determinism. So because these are the different possibilities, you can imagine a sort of grid layout where you occupy all the different possibilities. So for instance, you might think that the world is deterministic, that causal determinism is true. And you might think that this implies that we're not responsible. This is what the hard determinist believes. This is what the hard determinist view claims, that that determinism is true, the universe is deterministic, that the Newtonian dominoes, that's how the universe works. And therefore, moral responsibility is not true, that we cannot be responsible for our actions. Right? So this is a kind of incompatibilist view, that causal determinism is not compatible with responsibility. Right? So this is why it's red here, because its answers to these questions are incompatible. The other kind of incompatibilism is the libertarian view. So the libertarian has the exact opposite view in terms of this table from the hard determinist view. The libertarian starts from the perspective of moral responsibility, says, yes, we have moral responsibility, we are responsible for our actions, and therefore, you might think that causal determinism is false, or that at least the deterministic universe is not influencing or is not in control of my actions, that in fact I am genuinely the source of my actions, I am genuinely the cause of my actions. So the libertarian view has the exact opposite. So the libertarian view is also an incompatibilist view. It also thinks that moral responsibility is not compatible with determinism, but it has the exact opposite perspective as a hard determinist. It says yes to moral responsibility, no to causal determinism. So hopefully this chart makes clear that hard determinism and libertarianism disagree about these two things. The final view is compatibilism. So compatibilism is the view that determinism is true, and nevertheless, we're still responsible for our actions. So determinism is true in the sense that the science is right and the Newtonian domino universe is the correct way of viewing the universe, but the compatibilists disagree with the hard determinists that this means that there can be no responsibility. What the compatibilists argue is that there can be responsibility despite the fact that the universe is causally determined. So the compatibilists agree with the determinists about determinism, but they disagree with the determinists about moral responsibility. And conversely, the compatibilists agree with the libertarians about moral responsibility. Yes, you can be morally responsible for your actions, but they disagree with the libertarians about causal determinism. No, in fact, compatibilists believe that our actions can be determined and still we can be responsible for our actions. So the compatibilists want to have their cake and eat it too. And it's the most popular view because it seems to get the best of both worlds. You don't have to fight with the scientists, and you still get to have moral responsibility for actions. You still get a full, rich moral universe. Right? The worry from the compatibilist view is that the determinists are rejecting morality. It's a nihilistic view to reject moral responsibility. Right? And there's a sort of nihilism that seems to be threatened by the hard determinist view. On the other hand, there's this kind of anti-scientism, or sort of ignorant, or like willful ignorance, you might think, of the libertarian view, rejecting causal determinism. If you reject causal determinism, then you don't get any of the benefits of careful scientific investigation, right? And the compatibilist wants to say, well, actually, we might learn a lot about our actions from studying the brain. Just like the determinists who want to say that our actions come from the brain. The compatibilists are going to agree. Yes, in fact, our brain is the is a causal chain in this link. So determinism is true, and so we need to understand how brains work and bodies work and so on. But even when we have that deterministic scientific picture, we can still talk about responsibility and morality and even freedom, despite determinism. Okay, so the compatibilist view, we're going to spend the most time talking about in this view. I'll give you a couple of different examples of how you can get this. But it's the popular view because it seems to be the best of both worlds. But it's also the hardest view to pull off because you're going to get arguments from both sides. The determinists are going to think that it's not adequate rejection of responsibility, and the libertarians are going to think it's too deterministic. And so the compatibilists have the most difficult sort of middle position in this debate. Okay. So this is the structure of the debate. I want to start briefly by going over determinism and libertarianism, and then we'll talk about some compatibilists. So we've seen some of these views before. This is part of that Newtonian framework that we introduced in a couple of videos ago, or a couple of videos in the, I think video 2 in the Unit 1 lectures. So there's Leibniz with the deterministic worldview, again, that comes up in this Newtonian and Leibnizian time period, the beginning of the scientific revolution. The perspective of Newtonians is that the world is a giant machine, a giant clock that ticks by in these very regular and law-like ways, and maybe God created the machine, but the machine ticks by on its own. This is the clockwork universe. Maybe that universe was designed by an all-powerful, all-knowing God, but the reason that one state follows the next is because God set up the whole system, and the system itself is sort of moving along. So like a clock, right? So the clock maker designs the clock, designs each cog and each connection and each spring exactly just so for the watch to work. But once the clockmaker has designed the machine, built it, then the clockmaker can sort of let it out into the world, sell it to someone. The seller has to wind it, has to maintain it. But apart from that winding, the clock will keep its own time. Sort of, it'll march forward on its own mechanical logic. And the idea is that the universe is the same thing. So maybe God designs the initial conditions, but once God sets it off, the universe sort of ticks by on its own physical logic. Right? The physical laws, the Newtonian laws, describe how the universe goes along from one moment to the next. And most of the philosophers in this period, think about God as being this sort of non-interventionist God or deist God, where God sets up the initial conditions, but afterwards does not intervene. So everything that happens is part of the natural order, just unfolding itself. You might be a strongly religious person and think that unfolding reveals something important about the nature of God's design, but you don't think that God is intervening moment to moment, that as the universe is unfolding, it's the natural world that's unfolding. Okay. So Leibniz has this clockwork universe. Laplace, you might remember from the other video, has this thought experiment of a demon who can predict every future state because they know all of the universal laws. So Laplace's demon knows the laws that govern the movement of the universe from one state to the next. And because they know those laws, they can predict what happens in the very far future. As long as you know the initial condition and the transition rules, you can predict everything that happens in the future. And it's this kind of prediction about the future that the determinists suggest is possible that makes trouble for freedom and free will, because if everything can be predicted, right? If all I have to know are the conditions of the Big Bang, and I can predict everything that's going to happen, including like what you're going to eat for lunch next week, then it seems like you didn't really have a lot of choice because you didn't control what happened at the Big Bang 13 billion years ago. So in what sense was that choice of a ham sandwich for lunch really yours? And in what sense was it just playing out of this big clockwork-like machine? Right, so it seems like the deterministic perspective of science rules out the possibility that we're actually choosing our actions. It seems like there's a threat to our freedom, the possibility of free will. Nevertheless, there's a lot of good reasons to embrace the scientific or mechanistic perspective. Nikola Tesla gives a defense of the mechanical perspective in this quote, but notice at the end, Tesla says, but this apparently mechanistic conception is not antagonistic to the ethical conception of life. So Tesla believed in a mechanical universe, but Tesla was also a compatibilist. Tesla thought that the mechanical conception of the universe is not antagonistic. There's no conflict between the mechanistic universe and an ethical conception of life. So just believing in a deterministic universe does not settle your view on ethics or freedom. This is why the free will debate is not just about determinism, it's really about moral responsibility. So Tesla is a compatibilist, and we'll come back to compatibilists. I'm just sort of giving you the justification or the mindset of the determinist. But so this determinism is just that the universe is causally determined, that prior events, future events are caused by prior events, or necessitated by prior events. So hard determinism, or sometimes called hard incompatibilism, is just the view in the free will debate that a deterministic universe implies that we have no freedom and therefore we have no responsibility. So here's a brief statement of the argument. It's sort of a very rough sketch of the argument. You can make this a lot more precise and explicit, but the hard determinist will say that, so first of all, the hard determinist believes in determinism, that all events are determined by prior events, that everything that happens is necessitated by the causal structure of the world in the previous state. So all events are determined by prior events, and moreover, that my own actions are simply another event in this causal chain. They're not independent of this causal chain. The hard determinist thinks that not only is the universe causally determined, but I'm entirely part of the universe, and so also my actions are causally determined. And again, that's just determinism. The hard determinist position is that this has direct implications for the free will debate. If all my actions are determined by prior causal events, then I am not the source of these. I'm not the source of my actions, and so my actions are not free. And so, if my actions are not free, then I'm not responsible for them either. So the hard determinist rejects the notion that I'm responsible for any of my actions because they think that the deterministic nature of the universe and my own nature as a physical being requires or implies that none of my actions were caused by me. I'm not the source of any of those actions. The source is, if anything, the Big Bang 13 billion years ago, and therefore I'm not responsible for my actions. How can you hold me responsible for my eating decisions? Right? It's not my fault that I ate a bunch of cake. I was determined by unwavering physical laws, and my evolutionary history and so on. And all this stuff makes it so that I really like cake, and I can't stop from putting the cake in my mouth. And you can't hold me responsible for it. It's not my fault because I have no control over my actions. I'm just a physical cog in this giant universal machine. So there's no free will, there's no autonomy. I'm just a physical system like any other, and I bear no responsibility for my actions. Again, this is not Tesla's view. Tesla agrees with points 1 and 2. All events are determined. My actions are simply events in this causal chain. But Tesla's and other compatibilists are going to stop this before part 3, or statement 3, that my actions are determined by prior event. I'm sorry. Tesla will agree with 1, 2, and 3. My actions were determined by prior events, but nevertheless, there's still an ethical conception of life that maybe that I can be held responsible for my actions. I'm not exactly sure what Tesla's moral theory is, but there's going to be a stop here. There's going to have to be some other premises that prevent us from falling down this hard deterministic, nihilistic slope to the claim that I'm not responsible for my actions, or that morality doesn't exist. So you could be a hard determinist, and you might think that the sciences imply that hard determinism is true. But a lot of people, most people, are resistant to, most philosophers are resistant to the overt implications of hard determinism. So here's a couple of reasons for resisting those implications. For one thing, it seems like I have control over my actions. It doesn't seem like I'm just a cog in the machine. Sometimes it does. Maybe sometimes, like when I'm driving for long periods of time, I sort of go into autopilot and I'm sort of just doing a thing, and it's controlled sort of not with a lot of conscious deliberation, in the same way that like when I'm walking down the street, all of my foot movements are being controlled by my spine, and there's not a lot of conscious deliberate effort going into exactly how I move my feet. It just sort of happens. So sometimes there's those kind of involuntary actions, or sort of unconscious actions that don't seem entirely under my conscious control. But at least sometimes it seems like I do have conscious control. Like I'm choosing deliberately to pick up the pen. I had a thought, I'm going to pick up that pen, and then I did it, and my body followed my my choices. I saw that happened, and it seems very weird to say that I'm not in control when I can, very simple examples demonstrate to me pretty clearly that I do have control of my actions. I can pick up the pen as many times as I want. Unless someone comes in here and stops me from picking up the pen, I'm going to keep picking up the pen and putting it down. And I have each time this deliberate, conscious thought that I want to pick up the pen, and then I do it. And so it sure seems to me like I have control of my actions. So what does the hard determinist say to this? Well, the hard determinist is going to say, well, okay, it seems to you like you have control of your actions, but seeming doesn't really matter. Like it's just an illusion of the kind of brain that you have. So you have a kind of brain that moves around the world in certain ways and justifies, well, explains, but also justifies those actions to yourself in various ways. So I justify these actions to myself, and the way that I justify them is by putting them in terms of conscious control and freedom and so on. But these are just concepts that I'm using to explain what's happening. But that doesn't mean that that's what's really happening. Those are just the stories that I'm telling myself to make it seem like I'm conscious, to make it seem like I'm free, like I have free control over my actions. When in fact, every time I pick up the pen, that really is just a product of these natural processes, brain processes, but also maybe like long historical processes. I'm trying to make an argument. Philosophers tend to like concrete objects like pens to make their arguments, and so like I'm participating in this long philosophical tradition, and I'm really just sort of repeating it or imitating it because I've been trained to do so. And so maybe my actions are not totally free, but they're actually the result of all these constraints and influences on my behavior. So just the fact that it seems free to me, that might just be a cognitive illusion. That might just be me misunderstanding what's really happening. But if I actually looked at the physics and the neuroscience, it would be unmistakable that in fact what's really going on is that I have no control over my actions. Okay, so one thing is that it seems like my actions are free. Another thing is that it sure seems like we have to hold people responsible for their actions. It sure seems like when someone does something wrong, they should be punished, and when someone does something right, they should be praised. That if someone's a serial killer, that we should take them off the streets so they can't kill again. And like that kind of stuff is holding people responsible for their actions. It's holding people accountable for their actions, responding to people in ways that are sensitive to their choices. And not doing that seems weird. If the hard determinist is true, then it really doesn't matter if we put people in jail or not. If we stop putting people in jail, that's just how the universe played out. That's just from the Big Bang. That's just the inevitable way that the universe goes. Or if we keep putting people in jail, or if we start a totalitarian society where there's mass imprisonment and so on, mass slavery or whatever, these kinds of things. Maybe they'd be unfortunate from some perspective, but we wouldn't have any control over them. There's nothing that we could do otherwise because they're just the inevitable result of these physical causal laws. So, because the determinist thinks that everything's determined, they think that we can't be held responsible. The objection is that, well, it sure seems like that we should be held responsible for actions. But again, the determinist is just going to say, well, that seeming is just an artifact of the kind of brain you have. Like you have this brain that evolved for social primates to interact in certain ways. Not because those ways were true, but because those ways, helped evolutionary success, and you're the kind of creature that's maximizing for evolutionary success or whatever. So there's this biological and there's this historical and physical story that explains all your actions. You might tell things to yourself about what you're doing that make it seem to you in a particular way, but that's again just because that's how your brain works. You have these models of yourself and others, and you're just trying to get by. The determinist is not blaming you for thinking that people should be held responsible. Like you really don't have any choice in the matter. You can't blame anyone. Like the hard determinist isn't blaming anyone for anything. All they're saying is that these are just illusions that we're entertaining. But that's not really how the world works. The world works is just the physics. It's just atoms in the void. And we just happen to be a set of atoms that seems to care about things. But that's just an artifact of the way that our brains work. And it's not really how the universe works. We're not really free in any more substantive sense. So a lot of people just find this kind of view nihilistic and hopeless and maybe even scary or dangerous. They think that it implies some kind of depressed state, or it implies a kind of nihilism where nothing matters and you might as well do anything you want. Might as well quit school and travel the country and swim in every ocean or whatever. Like, do whatever you want because it's all determined anyway, and you don't have any control over it anyway. And so stop forcing you to do things because it's going to happen regardless. So this kind of nihilistic view tends to be unpopular, especially to adults, people who maybe have a mortgage and want some social and political stability. This kind of nihilism seems dangerous. Maybe the kind of immature nihilism from teenagers or something like that. The hard determinist is going to say, though, that it's not the job of physics to make us hopeful about the future. The physics is supposed to describe how the world works. So if it seems hopeless to you, well, I mean, that's, in some sense it's too bad, but in another sense, it's not like you were going to do anything different anyway. Like that, your reactions are also just how the physics plays out. So like maybe it would be better if we didn't dwell on the physics and sort of lived in ignorant bliss and just did whatever we're going to do anyway. And so maybe if you can't help it, but maybe it would be nice if you just stopped thinking about determinism because it'll make you unhappy, even if it's true. But the determinist doesn't think we have any control over it anyway, so these responses to the objections probably aren't very satisfying, but the hard determinist doesn't really think that they have an obligation to satisfy you. To satisfy you in a way that breaks your illusion. Like maybe we're caught in these illusions because of the way that our brains work, and so maybe the fact that you can't see outside that illusion, maybe that's an indictment of your cognitive limitations, but it's not a proof that that you have any kind of real freedom. Okay. I gave a real negative description of determinism there. Sorry. That's maybe harsher than I should have because I feel most sympathies to determinism. But whatever. Let's go over libertarianism as the alternative, the sort of diametrically opposed view. And the libertarian really, I should clarify here that there's a political libertarian, like the Libertarian Party is a political party. You can vote for people who run for the Libertarian Party. And libertarian in politics really doesn't have anything to do with libertarian in the free will debate. The root word is liberty, and so this is both about freedom. But the political libertarian is about political freedom, and the metaphysical libertarian or the free will libertarian, this is not about political freedom so much as it is about metaphysical freedom. It's about are my choices caused by me? Am I the source of my actions? These kinds of questions. And there are relationships between this and the political issues, but they're very loose, and you can be a libertarian in the free will debate without being a libertarian politically, like and vice versa. Like they're not necessarily related in any deep way. Okay. So the libertarian in the free will debate argues in the exact opposite direction as the determinists. Let me go back to determinism. Determinism starts from the belief which they inherit from science. They think that all events are determined, and in some sense the hard determinist is just trying to follow the implications of the view that all events are determined. And to some extent, the libertarian is doing the exact opposite, is starting from the opposite place, where the libertarian assumes, takes for granted that moral responsibility is true, that I am responsible for my actions, I do have voluntary control, and so I have moral responsibility for my actions. And the libertarian is just starting from this premise and seeing what follows from it. If I'm responsible for my actions, that means that my actions must be free. I can't be responsible for things if I'm not acting freely. Like if someone was controlling me, if someone implanted a chip in my brain and could control me with like an Xbox controller, and then made me do a bunch of stuff, hit a bunch of people or whatever. Maybe it was my physical arm that was hitting people, but if I'm being controlled by someone else and these are not voluntary actions, then I can't really hold me responsible, right? So because they're not free, because it wasn't my choice, it was someone else controlling me. Right, so if I'm to be held responsible, then I must be free. So libertarians assume that I'm responsible, and if I'm responsible, I must be free. That means I must be the source of my actions. And if I'm the source of my actions, if I could have done otherwise, if my actions are up to me in the right sort of way, then they're not caused by prior events, especially they're not necessitated or determined by prior events. So if I'm responsible for my actions, then my actions cannot be determined by prior events, which means that some events aren't caused by prior events, which means the deterministic premise is false, that there's at least some things like my actions that are not determined by prior events. Maybe physics says that all actions are determined, but look, physics must be wrong because I'm responsible for my actions, and that requires that I'm free, and that requires that at least some things, like my actions, are not determined. Maybe they're determined in some ways, like, so I can do some things, I can't do everything, I can't fly. I can't just fly by flapping my wings, or flapping my arms very hard. I don't have wings. Maybe I can fly in an airplane, but then it's not me that's flying, it's the airplane that's flying and I'm just cargo. But I can't just flap my arms and fly, and that's a physical limitation. That's a limitation of gravity and aerodynamics, and I don't really have a lot of control over my own personal aerodynamics. Maybe I can wear bat wings or something and fly a little bit more. And in fact, people do this. There's all sorts of skydiving where people wear look like flying squirrel wings under their arms and gives them kind of control over their flight. But I don't have that without wearing a special fancy suit. And again, these are limitations of physics, of gravity, of aerodynamics, of drag, and so on. So I am constrained by physics, but part of the idea for the libertarian is that my physical actions are my actions are underdetermined by the physics. So the physics constrain me, but within those constraints I have freedom. So I can't just flap my wings, but I can walk around, and there's lots of places I can reach by walking around. There's even more places I can reach by getting into a car and driving around. And nothing forces me to go one place rather than another. I can go, in some sense, wherever I choose. So maybe there are gated communities, or there are really remote places that are really hard to get to. And so, again, these are physical constraints on my ability to go anywhere. But if it's reachable by the road, and I can just get in a car and drive somewhere, that I'm sort of free in that sense. I can sort of do whatever I want. And if it's what I want, if I'm acting on what I want, then I really am free. And if that kind of freedom implies that determinism is false, well, then so much for determinism, so much for science. In fact, if I am really that free, it implies that there are some limits on what science can actually know, or what mechanical explanations can actually explain. Like, maybe you can explain any machine with science, but I am free, and so it would be, the argument goes, it would be impossible to explain what I'm doing in any mechanical terms. I'm not just a machine, I'm free. Right? The libertarian perspective here is partly this antagonism to mechanical or deterministic explanations on the basis of a commitment to our own freedom and autonomy. Now, there's a lot of different versions of this view, and maybe the most obvious one, especially since the stereotype of the scientific revolution is that it's a revolution against religion. So if the libertarians are hostile against science, then you might characterize a libertarian view as a religious view. Like, if my soul is not physical, then my soul can choose whatever it wants, and you can't explain my soul with science. And so my soul is free, and science can't take that away from me, something like that. But there's actually quite a lot of libertarians who are not merely arguing from a religious or spiritual perspective. And so the example I want to give of libertarian, we'll talk about Kant later, and Kant also thinks of himself as libertarian. I'm skeptical that Kant's libertarian, but the libertarian that I want to talk about is Jean-Paul Sartre. So Sartre says, so Sartre's a libertarian. Sartre believes in radical freedom. Sartre's not a theist. Sartre's an atheist. He's an explicit atheist. He does not believe in God. He does not believe in anything other than the natural world. And moreover, Sartre mostly believes in science. He's not he's not scientistic in the sense that he believes science dogmatically, but he's more than willing to say that science has a lot of insight into how the physical world works in the natural world, and moreover that I'm a natural creature. I'm not a spiritual or supernatural creature. But Sartre thinks that despite the natural world being mostly mechanical, we are nevertheless free, and we're radically free. Sartre captures this in a quote. He says, "Man is condemned to freedom." So we are so free that we cannot escape freedom. There's a kind of paradox here that if you're condemned to something, it sounds like you're not free. But what Sartre says is that we're condemned to freedom. We can't escape freedom. That every choice we make is free, and moreover, that everything that we do is we're responsible for. And Sartre is radical about this, that we're responsible for all of our choices. A very traditional example, we'll talk about this more when we get to Locke, of unfreedom is a prisoner, someone who's in a prison cell, locked up. Sartre himself was actually locked up as a prisoner of war during World War, I want to say World War I, but maybe it was World War II. I don't remember. I think it was World War I. But Sartre was a prisoner of war. He was French. He was a prisoner of war. He was locked up himself for a while. And being locked up in a prison seems to be a clear case of a lack of freedom. But for Sartre, we can't help but be free. We can't escape our freedom. And that even someone who's even a prisoner in a cell is free in some sense. In particular, they're free to choose how they're going to act in that cell. That's not a lot of freedom. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything you want. You have a lot of constraints. The prison guards are looking at you. They are barking orders at you and telling you to do very specific things. And it seems like in that case you're completely constrained. But what Sartre talks about and notices from his own experiences as a prisoner of war, that not every soldier acts the same in these conditions, right? So all the soldiers are being subjected to the same tight constraints, physical constraints, the same abusive treatment from the guards. But some soldiers are breaking down under the pressure, having complete psychological breakdowns where they're unable to control themselves and sobbing. And it's not surprising that someone who's being tortured or someone who's in a prisoner of war camp is having a psychological breakdown. It's very understandable. Some people have that. But Sartre says that doesn't happen to everyone. If you would think that if everyone's determined to act in a particular way, that everyone being forced to those same very tight conditions would have everyone behaving in the same way. But Sartre says that's just not the case. Some people did respond very badly, but some people, not that they thrived and flourished, no one is going to do well in a prison system, but that they were able to act with courage, maybe able to act with honesty and bravery. They were able to support and help other people to whatever limited extent they can. But some people were able to maintain their sense of identity, their maybe even maintain a sense of humor, be able to joke about things, even in the hellish environment of the prison cell. And Sartre's idea here is that it's because people can still choose, even in these conditions, people can still choose how they're going to take it, how they're going to live their life. And someone can choose to give up and become overwhelmed by their scenario, but someone can also choose to face it, and maybe even face it with good humor. And so for Sartre, it's important that we're always free, even in these highly constrained situations. And because we're always free, we're always responsible for actions. This is really important for Sartre to understand that actions are radically free in this sense, because Sartre thinks that part of what we're doing in the world is deciding who we are, and we decide who we are by deciding what to do. And in some sense, that's always up to us. Even when we're prisoners in a cell, we are still deciding who we are and what we're doing. It's still us that's acting, and our actions are always free. Sartre's an existentialist, and I don't want to get too caught up in existentialism. There's the crash course for existentialism. But this does relate to some of the discussions we've already had, and this is sort of why it was helpful to build that big structure. So remember, Aristotle's an essentialist. Aristotle thinks that your essence determines your future. Your essence determines your goals and your purposes. Because you're a human, you're a rational animal, and that tells you what an idealized final state for your life, right? It tells you what you should be aiming at. It tells you what's good for you. The existentialist is like a little bit in the 19th century, but really in the 20th century. Starts a mid-20th century thinker. Existentialism is a rejection of this Aristotelian essentialism. Sartre says that existence precedes essence. So for Aristotle, your existence is your essence. You are to be a thing is to be, for Aristotle, to be a thing is to be a kind of thing. To be a thing is to have a kind, is to have a nature. And what Sartre says is that existence precedes essence, that you are in the world before you've figured out who you are, and part of your job as an existing thing is to figure out who you are, to decide who you are, to make choices about what you do or don't do. So your essence isn't determined before you're born. Your essence is determined through the course of your life, through your actions. So the existentialists don't think that there's any telos, there's any final goal state that we're all aiming towards. The existentialists don't think that there's some internal nature that we have that settles what we should do or what's good for us. For the existentialists like Sartre, it's up to us to decide what our values are, what our actions are, and what we're going to do with our lives. And no one can decide that for us. You might ask for advice from other people, but no one can tell you what to do, because everyone's advice comes from their own experiences and their own lives, and their lives are different from yours, and you're the only one in a position to ultimately decide what you do. Maybe you're highly constrained. Maybe you're someone who lives in conditions of extreme lack, someone in poverty or someone in a prison cell. And in those situations, you don't have a lot of options, and what you can do is very tightly constrained by that environment. But even in those cases, it's still up to you to decide how to live your life. It's still up to you to decide what you're going to do next. And you can't escape from that. You're condemned to always make those choices. That's the human condition. That's the condition of being it's the human condition. It's the condition of being a human, is being forced to make choices. I mean, sometimes we adopt traditions or we adopt cultures that get us out of making these choices, but for Sartre, this is a way of living inauthentically. He talks about authenticity. So one of the challenges for existentialism, if we don't have a telos, if there's no idealized end or goal that we're aiming to, then what should we do? How do we know how to make the choices that we're faced with? Like, what's the arbiter of what the right thing to do is? And for Sartre, this is also up to you. It's your job as a free agent to figure out what values you're going to live by. And you might make mistakes. You might do the wrong things by your own lights. Not because there's some absolute universal moral law, not because there's some God to tell you what's right and wrong, but it's because it's up to you to make these decisions, and you might fail by your own standards. You might fail yourself. Maybe the person who gives up in the prison cell and can't go on, in some sense, has failed themselves, has failed to keep care of themselves, has failed to take control of themselves and live the life that they want. And again, you can't blame a person for doing that, because it's really hard to keep your sanity in conditions of torture. But maybe there's still some room for choice even in those circumstances. So authenticity is choosing your values for yourself, choosing the course of your life for yourself. A lot of people don't just choose the course of their life for themselves, but they adopt, they simply do what they're told, or they adopt a culture or tradition that plans a lot of this stuff out, right? So if your culture or tradition tells you that you should be married by a certain age, have a degree by a certain age, you should be married by a certain age, and have a career at a certain age, right? These are not choices that you're making for yourself. These are sort of cultural norms that you're trying to adapt to. Maybe to some extent you can adapt to those by your own lights and sort of in the self-motivated way. When I think about this kind of authenticity, I sometimes think about one of my aunts, who is a fairly successful, she's now like a manager, or like a sort of high-level position in this biomedical company. So she's living a good life now. She has a good career. She's near retirement, and so she has a very high-level position. But when I asked her, why did she go into this career, a long time ago, when I asked her about this, she told me she didn't really have any desire to go into this career. It wasn't a particular interest of hers, but she went to a career counselor, and the counselor, gave her a test and said, by your test scores, it seems like you'd be really good at chemistry. And so she went to college and studied chemistry, and then someone there told her, here's a job that you would maybe do really well at. And so she took the job, and she stayed in that job for a long time, and sort of worked her way up the ladder, and now she has a very successful life. You might think that she lived a good life. She sort of reached the pinnacle of that career trajectory. But then you might also think, but none of this was her own choice. People were just telling her what to do, and she was just doing it because she didn't have a better idea for herself. And so in some way, she by some measures, she might have reached success, but maybe by other measures, she failed to actually live her own life. And she was just living the life that other people were giving her. And so in some ways, maybe that's a tragedy, even if she lives a life of like material comfort and so on. So for Sartre, what Sartre's going to say is that there's something inauthentic. There's something not self-chosen. By just adopting the advice of her career counselor, by just doing what other people told her to do, she has avoided the hard task of actually choosing for herself what to do. And this is a way of being inauthentic. This is a way of avoiding the existential choices that you have. Another way of putting the same point, which I have on the screen here, this is Simone de Beauvoir. Simone and Sartre, they were, I think they were married. They were definitely lovers. They were a famous philosophy couple. And this was back in a time, especially in France, where philosophers were also public figures, public intellectuals. Sartre was well known and celebrated in his day. He was also very active in political causes in France and elsewhere. And Simone was there with him most of that time. She helped him edit magazines. They edited magazines together in France. They were like the hot couple, power couple in the French cafe scene in the mid-20th century. In some ways, Simone was a much better philosopher than Sartre. Simone's book, The Second Sex, is where she really starts what's I guess called second wave feminism. So first wave feminism was about getting the right to vote, and then second wave feminism is really bringing in not just as an intellectual, not just as an activist political cause, but as an intellectual cause, really trying to understand from a theoretical and philosophical perspective how the gender division of labor works and how gender roles operate. And the logic and history of these gender roles. And so Second Sex, a lot of it's a historical discussion, a lot of it's deeply engaged with the psychology and medical practices of the time, and the understanding of women and the different gender expressions that women might have. Simone talks about all of this stuff. Very, very, very interesting, very scientifically sophisticated work, Second Sex. And this sort of starts academic feminism as we know it today. A lot of it looks antiquated and dated by today's standards, but she's writing in the 1940s or 1950s, and it's really impressive work that she was doing, really solid scholarship. One of the more famous lines from this book, The Second Sex, Simone says is famous, is that one is not born but becomes a woman. And I think this is a very clear expression of this more general existentialist theme of existence precedes essence, right? So the idea is that there's no essence to a woman. It's certainly not an essence you're born with, but you become a woman. You become a woman through your own actions. This is the idea. This is Simone's idea: is that you aren't a woman because of what you are essentially. You're a woman because of what you do with your life. And the same thing would go for a man. And the idea that these gender identities are not essences that we have involuntarily, but these are essences that we construct of our own free action. This is like at the very core of 20th century existentialism, and I think it's a really nice counterpoint to the Aristotelian essentialism that we saw in Unit 1 and sort of the ancient view. Notice also that this is not the idea that one is not born but becomes a woman. This is not really a fight with physics, right? This is not an alternative causal theory. Today, this is not exactly how Simone talks about it, but today we would talk about gender identity as being socially constructed. So it's not causally constructed. Maybe certain biological facts are causally constructed by your genetics or whatever. But gender, like being a woman or being a man or being a non-binary, these are socially constructed roles that aren't merely necessitated by certain physical facts, but are expressive of also certain kinds of social facts. The way that these gender roles operate at a social level. So when Simone says one is not born but becomes a woman, this is not hostile to science in any sort of way. This is recognizing that gender roles are not causally determined. It's not saying that they're somehow free of physical laws. I was just saying that this is a different kind of domain. The domain of gender identity is not a domain that's determined by physical facts. It's determined by social facts. And maybe to some extent, social facts are determined by physical facts, but they're not the same physical facts as the biological facts that maybe determine sex identity. Okay, so existentialism, I don't want to get too far down existentialism, but Sartre gives us a nice example of a libertarian position. Maybe you don't like Sartre's particular brand of libertarianism. A more generic version of libertarianism, again, comes up in the Four Views on Free Will book. This is Robert Cain giving what he takes to be a sort of common sense picture of what free will amounts to, or what we're claiming when we talk about free will. And it's this image of the garden of forking paths, right? So the idea is that this is a kind of timeline, and that at every junction here, there's a split, and that split represents a choice. And right, the idea, the garden of forking paths, is that I'm presented with a lot of choices. So as I'm going through my life, I encounter choices, and I can go one way in that choice, or I can go another way in that choice. And what it means to be free is that these things are genuinely open, that these options are genuinely open to me. So I'll just read a little bit. So suppose Jane just graduated from law school and she has a choice between joining a law firm in Chicago or a different firm in New York. If Jane believes that her choice is a free choice or made of her own free will, she must believe that both options are open to her while she's deliberating. She could either choose one. She could choose either one, and the idea is that if she did not believe this, then what would be the point of deliberating, right? So if Jane thought that her choice was determined, then she wouldn't think about it as a choice at all. But this is exactly how we think about it when, like, there's two options. Do I go to New York or do I go to Chicago? And Jane believes that which decision she makes is genuinely up to her in some sense, so that we're genuinely faced with these splitting options, and going one way leads you to a set of different options than it would going the other way, and our free choice is choosing between these options. And in some sense, making these choices is really affecting the future of the universe. Like when Jane chooses to go to Chicago versus New York, she's leading the future universe down one path versus the other. And the things that might have happened, you know, if she'd gone to Chicago, and these things could have happened, but those things will never happen because she actually chose to go to New York, and these other possibilities opened up to her. And what Jane's freedom in this choice amounts to is precisely this capacity to choose which branch of these forking paths, which branch am I going to go down? And Jane really, right, the libertarian is going to insist that Jane really has this choice. And if everything is determined by physical law, that's the domino effects thing. There's no forking paths there at all, because the physics determines exactly what happens next. And there's no possibilities. There's no alternative. If I hold a ball and I drop it, the ball's going to fall down. Maybe if I'm in space and I drop the ball doesn't fall down. But when I'm near the Earth and I drop the ball, the conditions are going to fall. It's just going to fall down. That's what the physics necessitates, and no amount of wishing is going to make that otherwise. No amount of choosing is going to make the ball do anything other than fall under the force of gravity. So this is the libertarian view, is that we genuinely have these choices. We are genuinely able, with every choice we make, to swing the trajectory of the universe along these different paths. You know, maybe my choices are not that grand. You know, maybe some people are sometimes in opportunities to make really important, world-changing choices. Like maybe, well, I'm not gonna give examples of that, but maybe sometimes people are in the position of making world-changing choices. Maybe for most of us, these choices are fairly mundane. Do I go to the bathroom before I record this video or afterwards? Like, maybe those really do close off or open up certain possibilities of my future. But it's not a whole lot rides on it beyond that. Okay. So I have a bunch of objections to libertarianism. Maybe just like the determinist objections, people will not find the libertarian views here very, very satisfying, or the responses very satisfying. My big objection to libertarianism is what happens to the forks that we don't travel down. So, again, I'm a hostile interlocutor here. I don't really like the free will debate, because I think it's anachronistic. I also think a lot of the things that come up and seem intuitive at first glance really just don't make a lot of sense. So I think this idea of garden forking path, it's sort of nice the first time you think about it, but if you think about it for any length of time, I don't think it's very coherent. And here's why I don't think it's coherent. So let's say that this top branch is the New York branch, this down here is the Chicago branch. And let's say Jane actually does choose to go to New York. And then, maybe there's a choice between eating a pizza and eating a whatever. So then Jane is faced with other choices. But the garden of forking paths here, if Jane actually does choose New York, then this junction goes away because the Chicago junction wasn't chosen. So Jane's over here now. But the garden description here still shows a bunch of branches on the other side that were never pursued. So in what sense is this choice a genuine choice for Jane? I understand maybe that this choice is a genuine choice for Jane, but once Jane picked to go to New York, then all of these choices collapse. All of these choices go away. And in fact, all the choices, any choice other than the one that Jane chose goes away. And so, in fact, when Jane looks backwards on her choices, it just looks like a straight line with no branching paths at all. That's just the way it went. Maybe when Jane's approaching a choice and she's trying to imagine what happens afterwards, she can imagine that, if she does go to Chicago, then she'll have options of doing other things. And maybe when she's approaching the choice, you can conceptualize these alternatives, and you can see why those alternatives close down if you choose one over the other. But once you make the choice, those alternatives aren't there anymore. Like once Jane moves to New York, there's no more moving to Chicago, and there's no more making all of these Chicago choices. So this branch just disappears. And I sort of think that that's what happens to all of these branches, is that the appearance of branching is only an appearance as you're approaching a choice. But once you actually make the choice, all of those branches go away, and in fact what you see is just one long narrow chain where there were no options at all. So this looks like an illusion to me. It looks like wishful thinking about a way the world works that doesn't. It's not the way the world actually works. So in what sense are those possibilities really real? In what sense could you have chosen those alternatives? I guess also for the libertarian, I'm curious about to what extent we can be considered free when there are actual physical constraints. So we talked about me not being able to fly because my arms are not very aerodynamic. So how do we understand our choices within those physical constraints? And what if those physical constraints entirely determine our choices? Like why not? I don't see why not. Again, my worry is that this is a kind of just positive, like wishful thinking or positive thinking. And I actually want to associate positive thinking most closely with the Aristotelian view. With where's the acorn, right? Like the positive thinking is really about like realizing your full potential, and this is a kind of Aristotelian teleological logic. Right? So the idea is that if the acorn can visualize the oak tree that it wants to become, then it'll have a better shot at going down the best paths and actually achieving that end. So, when I'm thinking about these forking paths, it looks a little bit like wishful thinking in this Aristotelian sense, like you're trying to imagine these different futures, and maybe what's going on is that I'm not just imagining a single future, but I'm imagining sort of different possibilities, like the full-grown oak tree, the telos, the final end, is maybe way far down this choice chain, but maybe I have a particular choice right now, like do I water the acorn or not? And maybe the way that I evaluate this choice is by thinking about what happens later on. So maybe being able to visualize and imagine different possibilities can help me make choices right now, but that doesn't mean that those possibilities actually exist in any physical sense. It doesn't mean that they're real possibilities. Like I might imagine things that can never actually happen. a relative is coming to visit, and I expect that they're going to get here by 6 o'clock, and so I'm imagining all these possibilities of what's going to happen when they get here by 6 o'clock. But it turns out that they're late and there was a lot of traffic, and that there's no physical way that they're going to get here before midnight. And so all of my thinking about these options of about what's going to happen at 6 o'clock, maybe we sit down and talk for a little bit, and then we eat, and then we have coffee or whatever. I'm having all these options, but if the person's not going to get here until after midnight, then all those options just go out the window, and I can think about them, but they weren't really real possibilities except in my imagination. So is that all that's going on in libertarianism? Is it just in my imagination that I'm conceiving of these possibilities, or are they real possibilities out there in the world? Because if the libertarian is saying that there are real possibilities out there in the world, that seems in tension with the scientific determinism. But if all the libertarian is saying is that these are things that I'm imagining, well, what good is the imagination? Maybe it can help me make decisions, but it doesn't mean that those decisions are real. It doesn't mean the possibilities that I'm imagining are real. Okay, so I'm going to stop libertarianism there. I'm going to come back to it because Kant takes himself to be a libertarian. I don't think Kant is a real libertarian, and I think if we treat Kant as Kant thinks of himself as libertarian, but I don't think Kant is a real libertarian. If we think about Kant as being a compatibilist, I think his view makes a lot more sense. So let's actually talk about compatibilism right now. So I've given the two extreme incompatibilist views. Determinists think that we have no free will because there's no responsibility because everything's causally determined, and libertarians think we have responsibility, so it can't be the case that everything's causally determined. And the compatibilists want they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want both things to be true. They want determinism to be true, but they also want moral responsibility to be true. And the question is, how do you pull it off? How do you negotiate that tightrope walk to get both to have your cake and eat it too? So there's a lot of different ways of doing this. This is sort of a perennial thing the philosophers try to argue for, some kind of compatibilist view, one that's not hostile to the deterministic sciences, but that also takes seriously our the moral dimensions of our actions. This is a long quote from Kane, but Kane describes compatibilists in various ways. So Kane says, according to compatibilists, esoteric questions about whether determinism is true or not in the physical or psychological sciences are irrelevant to the freedoms that we really care about in everyday life. Right? So for the compatibilists, it just doesn't matter that the universe is deterministic. Responsibility and freedom come from... it's not that they come from different places. It's not that they require that things are non-determined. It's just that they deal with other things. So, for instance, and I'll come back to Daniel Dennett at the end of the lecture today, but Dennett talks about freedom and free will in terms of freedom's worth wanting. So, why do we care about freedom? Why do we want freedom? Well, because we don't want to be tortured. We don't want to be enslaved. We don't want to have to act as slaves. We don't want to be under control. And these are sensible things to want. And not only are these sensible things to want, but then it says these are things we can actually have. There have been people in slavery, and there are also people that are not in slavery. And if we can build a world where we're not in slavery, that seems to be a good thing. It seems to be something we can call freedom, to not be in slavery. And it seems to be a world that's worth building. It seems worthwhile to build a world where people are not tortured or people are not enslaved, where they're free from these kinds of abuses. And so, to the extent that we can do that, let's do that. But building a world where slavery doesn't exist, it doesn't require violating the laws of physics. It doesn't even require thinking that much about the laws of physics. You just need to respect other people. You just need to do things like don't enslave people. Don't let people treat other people in ways that are merely means to an end. Right? Don't let people torture people. Right? You can. Dennett's idea is that you can get these results. You can benefit from the virtues of freedom in these senses without really worrying too much about determinism at all, without really worrying too much about the constraints of physics at all. Whether or not slavery exists has nothing really to do with gravity or electromagnetism. It really has nothing to do with our capacity to determine physical law. So just stop worrying about determinism. Let's just start talking about the ways we're responsible or not. Let's talk about the kind of world we want to build, and just forget about determinism. that's not going to be a very satisfying answer to the determinists, to the hard determinists, who think that hard determinism implies that moral responsibility is not true. So that kind of answer is sort of maybe evading the point, and we'll come back to why you might want to evade the point in this way. But what I want to do now is talk about a couple of historical compatibilists. In particular, Locke and Frankfurt. And then we'll talk about Kant, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Dennett. But let's start with Locke. I'll say again that in the next video, we're going to talk about political autonomy, and some of this discussion is setting up our conversation about political autonomy. So Locke is a philosopher in the 1600s. This is like right at the start of the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution is happening all around him. He's an English thinker, so he's writing in English. But Locke has a big influence over a lot of the political events, especially in the 18th century, in the 1700s. So like the French and American revolutions are partly influenced and partly theorized in ways that draw directly from Locke. So Locke is writing 100 years before these revolutions, but he's a big influence. So Locke is one of these Enlightenment thinkers. He's supposed to be an enlightened modern thinker who's not only aware of the sciences, but pretty enthusiastic about the sciences. He, to some extent, endorses a mechanical worldview of the sort that scientists are starting to develop in his time. But it's a mechanical worldview that is still strongly influenced by its Aristotelian origins. So he's still talking about humans as being rational animals, as reason involving this sort of capacity to control our actions given our desires and so on. And we'll see how that works in just a second. But important for Locke is the idea that we're free agents, or that we're free actors, that we act freely, that reason allows us to act freely. And so Locke's understanding of the nature of our sort of natural action, or humans as part of the natural world, the sort of mechanical world, Locke's understanding of humans part of the natural world gives rise to his understanding of how governments should work, what a proper governing system is, or what a just governing system is. So Locke's view of justice and politics is grounded in his understanding of human action, and in particular around this debate of freedom. So again, we'll see a lot of the political stuff in the second lecture. I'm just sort of starting this out here. So as I said just a second ago, so Locke has a largely Aristotelian view of human nature. Humans are rational animals, but Locke doesn't want to ground his view of human nature in any kind of deep essence. So Locke thinks that we're rational animals, but our reason is part of the natural world and reflects features of the natural world. And so the way that Locke is understanding people, that this is supposed to not be a supernatural or religious view of human agents. There's a kind of dualism here, but we'll see how it works in a second. So first of all, humans are rational animals. So how do animals act for Locke? This isn't exactly in Locke's words, but this is just to sort of get the idea across. Locke thinks that animals are desire satisfaction machines, that animals have desires, that they have wants, needs, and they act in ways to satisfy our desires. This is very Aristotelian. This is the nutritive desire, or the nutritive drive for the Aristotelian soul. But for Locke, this is not a soul in any kind of spiritual or religious sense. This is just animals have desires, they have drives. The drives are discussed in terms of a will. So the will is what you want. A will is just your wants, your desires. A will is what your wants. Animals want things, they have desires, so animals have a will. Animals are little desire satisfaction machines, so they're machines in the sense that they act in this predictable way. Animals act in ways that try to satisfy their desires, so they got a bunch of desires, and they try to do things to satisfy their desires. So my cat, Alan, wants food sometimes, and so it does things like it goes to its food bowl, or it sniffs on the ground for a treat, or it chases a mouse, or whatever. These are things that Alan does to satisfy its desires. So it has a bunch of desires simply because it's an animal. Animals have different needs and wants. And my cat Alan is an animal, and so it has these wants, and then it acts in ways to satisfy those wants to get what it desires. Humans are also animals, and so to some extent we're also a desire satisfaction machine. What distinguishes the humans from the cats on Locke's view, but also on Aristotle's view, is that we're rational, is that we're sensitive to reasons. We don't just act on the basis of our desires, we act according to reasons. We have reasons for acting, and our reasons can influence our actions in various ways. So we don't just act on our immediate desire, we act on the basis of a rational will. So what we want is not just these animal desires, but what we want is also informed by our rational understanding of the world. Again, with the eating cake. So I have a desire for cake because it tastes good, but I also have a rational understanding that cake it's not healthy if I eat too much of it, and so I'm able to rationally control my behavior, and so my will here, and in particular what will eventually be called a volition, what I actually act on, it's still what I want, but it's what I rationally want. My rational want is to be healthy. And so I'm going to refrain from eating the cake because it's rationally what I know is best. And so it's not that I don't want the cake, but it's just that my rational will is overpowered. It exerts control over my animal desire for the cake. Okay, just a sneak peek of how this all builds up into a political theory. So Locke thinks that he's arguing in a sort of Hobbesian tradition, where there's a state of nature, and we'll talk a lot about that. There's big problems with the way that Locke and Hobbes think about a state of nature, and we'll talk about this in the next video. But the idea is that there's a natural state for humanity. So imagine our hunter-gatherer ancestors or something. A long time ago, humans in a natural state. So they're still human, they're still rational, they still have reason. And they're still even social to some extent. But what Locke says is in a state of nature, humans are completely free because we're free from any overt social restrictions. We don't live in a society. In the state of nature is opposed to society, or is the opposite of society, or before society, I guess. In the state of nature, we don't live under any laws or social restrictions. There's no one telling us what we can or cannot do. There's no one telling us what we should or shouldn't do. In a state of nature, we're free from any social or governing restrictions. And that means we're completely free to act however we want. We have wants, and just like any other animal, we act in ways to satisfy those desires. And Locke thinks that when we're acting in this free state, what we do naturally is work to protect our life, work to protect our freedom, and work to protect our property. Locke thinks that property is an important important aspect of our capacity to act freely. We can't act freely if people are stealing all our stuff all the time. Right? We have to have security of property, that we have to know where our stuff is. We have to make sure that it's protected and secure from arbitrary use, that we have some control over it. So Locke thinks that in a state of nature, we work to protect our life, liberty, and property. And then his idea is, but it's really hard to do this. Nature's really dangerous. Like, there's hurricanes and floods, and there's wild animals. There's people who want to steal from you, and nature's a dangerous thing. When we're in a state of nature, we try to protect our life, liberty, and property. But nature is really dangerous, and because we're rational, we realize that it would be in our collective interests to pool our resources and work together for the common good. This requires sacrificing some of our liberty, maybe sacrificing some of our property, but because we're rational, we can weigh the costs and benefits and realize that it's in our own interests to pool our resources together and build a society. Again, the society is going to have laws, and those laws are going to tell us what we can and cannot do, and that means that we are less free in society than we are in nature. If we went back out to nature, no one's going to tell us what to do, and we're completely free to do whatever we want. But when we're in society, the government tells us to pay taxes and to put clothes on and that kind of stuff, and mow our lawns, and those are restrictions on our liberty. But rationally, we recognize that it's in our interest to accept these restrictions on our freedom because it gets us so much benefit. It's much easier to deal with certain kinds of challenges given our shared interest and our cooperation. So Locke thinks it's rational to build government and society. Locke thinks that we do this freely. In fact, it's very important for Locke that the society that we build is a freely chosen society, because if we build a society that's telling us what to do and it's not in our interests, if the society that we build is actually compromising our life, our liberty, our property in ways that are not in our interest, are not in our benefit, and don't make sense as a rational trade-off. This is what Locke calls the consent of the governed. That society is a consensual agreement between people to pool our resources and act in the common interest, and that we sacrifice liberty for the sake of the collective interest because we recognize our benefit in it. But what that means is that if there is no benefit, if the society starts abusing us, it starts abusing our life, abusing our liberty, or abusing our property, then it no longer makes rational sense to join in with society. And for Locke, it means that we have an obligation to change that society. Society is only legitimate for Locke if it's derived from the consent of the governed, if the people who are in that society freely agree to the constraints of that society. That doesn't mean that society always goes my way. So paying taxes might suck sometimes. Maybe people prefer to not pay taxes. But they get a bunch of benefits. They get like roads and schools and so on from those taxes. So most people see that even if they don't like taxes, they realize that it's in their interest because they get all these social benefits. But there's sometimes the society has laws that really work against our interests. There's a law against speeding, and if I speed too much, I might go to jail, and they might deprive my liberty seriously by putting me in prison. And that seems pretty serious. I wouldn't be in jail if I was in a state of nature, because there would be no jails and there'd be no one to put me in jail. And so how can it be to my interest if I live in a society that could possibly put me in jail? But Locke thinks that, well, we agree to the laws because we recognize that the laws generally are in our interests. And if I violate the laws and I get sent to jail, well, I still consented to the framework of those laws. I still consented to the authority of the police to put violators in jail. And so the fact that I'm the victim of that law doesn't make it any less legitimate. So when I go to jail, I'm going to jail knowing that the society is still acting in the interests of everyone, and is still acting with justice, even though it results in depriving me of liberty. The reason it deprived me of liberty is because I failed to act in ways that were compatible with that cooperation. And the rules of society decided that wasn't okay. That went too much into the political stuff. I should have not gone that deep into it. We're going to talk again more about the political stuff next time. But in terms of freedom, for Locke, all that really matters about freedom is that we're acting on our desires. If you're free in a state of nature, and in fact, in some sense, all animals are free. Animals don't have a rational will, but animals act freely in the sense that they act on their desires. They have a will. They do what they want. Insofar as you can do what you want, insofar as you act on your desires, you're acting freely. So for Locke, an agent is free. What it means to be free is that you're acting on what you want. You're acting on your will, whatever that is. Right. So whatever your will happens to be. Right? You want to go to the store, and then you go to the store, you're acting freely. And then if, as you're walking to the store, you change your mind, and you want to go back home, and then you do that, then you're still free. But if I don't want to go to the store, but my partner drags me to the store, says, no, you're coming whether you like it or not, then I'm not free. Like maybe I could run away. So like when I go to the store with my partner, even though I don't want to some extent I'm not free because I'm not just doing what I want. Maybe to some extent I am still free because like I could like run away, or I could yell, or there's all sorts of other things I could possibly do, but I really don't want to do those things. I don't want to cause that much trouble. It's just that I really don't want to go to the store. But maybe my desire to have a happy relationship is more important to me than my desire not to go to the store. And so when I go to the store, in some sense I still am doing what I want, because what I want is to have a happy relationship. So deciding whether or not you're free in some action is really a matter of figuring out what you actually want, and then figuring out what you actually did, and seeing if what you want matches what you did. And Locke puts this in an interesting way. This came up before, but this we'll go into a little bit deeper now. Is this ability putting it in terms of the ability to do otherwise, what freedom is the ability to do otherwise. So in the example I gave where I go to the store, but then halfway through I decide I don't want to go to the store anymore and I turn back around. Right, so at the beginning I had a desire to go to the store, and then the desire changed, and when my desire changed, my actions also changed. Right, as soon as my desire changed, what I did also changed. And this is what Locke thinks is the key for recognizing when you're free. It's not just are you doing what you want, but if what you want changes, that what you do also changes. So here's an example where that wouldn't happen is with a prisoner in a cell. So we've been giving examples of prisoners in cells as being tightly constrained. Sartre thinks that a prisoner in a cell can still be free, but for Locke, a prisoner in a cell is like the quintessentially unfree person. They don't have control of their actions. The person in the cell is not free because it doesn't matter what they want. What they can do is very limited. They can only stay in the cell, right? The person might want to go do something else. They might want to take a shower. They might want to go eat or go frolic in a field. But because they're a prisoner, what they actually can do is very tightly limited to none of those things. The only thing they can do is sit in their cell, right? So prisoners are not free because they can't do what they want. But you might think, well, what about the prisoner who wants to be in jail? Like sometimes this is a bad idea, but sometimes I have this idea that maybe I should do some white-collar crime so that they send me to jail, and then when I'm in jail, I'll be able to like finally write the way that I want to and do the research that I want to. And I can't do that now because I got a job and I have all these responsibilities and so on. Again, this is a stupid fantasy, but there's this fantasy that maybe if I was in jail, I could have freedom to do whatever I want. So you can imagine someone who is like voluntarily in jail, and maybe someone who even gets excited about the sort of jail activities of going to the yard and working out, or working. I'm imagining like an Orange Is the New Black, someone who enjoys being in that environment and has a lot of friends and whatever. So in that case, so someone in jail can't do whatever they want because they're in jail. But you can imagine someone. Well, what if you want to be in jail? If you want to be in jail and then you put that person in jail, it seems like they're doing what they want. And so it seems like they're free. Look, they're acting on their will. Their desire is to be in jail, and they're doing what they want. So doesn't that mean they're free? But Locke's going to say that even if you're doing what you want in that case, you're still not free because you couldn't do otherwise. In the sense that if your desires change, right? So if the person who wants to be in jail goes to jail, maybe they go to jail and they're happy for a little while, and then they realize, no, actually jail sucks. I don't want to be here. Well, it doesn't matter if you don't want to be there anymore. You're still going to be in jail. So you might enjoy being in jail. You might want to be there for a while. But if that desire changes, your actions are not going to change. You're still going to be in jail, even if you don't want to. So the prisoner in the cell, even if they want to be in the cell, is still not free because if their desires changed, their actions would not change. Okay, so this is Locke's view of freedom. That freedom is about this kind of match between my desires and my actions, such that if my desires change, my actions change. Change in kind. Importantly for Locke, being free in this sense just requires the ability to act on our desires, but it doesn't require the ability to choose our desires. Remember that an animal is free if it can do what it wants, but this doesn't mean that the animal is choosing what it wants. The animal is just acting on whatever desires it has. It's hungry and sometimes it's tired, and that's just what its biology is telling it. So the animal is not choosing its will, and in this sense, the animal does not have a free will. But in this sense, Locke thinks humans also do not have a free will. Locke thinks that we're free. We're free if we can act on our desires, such that if our desires change, our actions also change. But Locke does not think we have a free will, because a free will would mean that we have control over what our will is, and Locke doesn't think we have that. Locke doesn't think we choose our desires. Locke thinks we choose our actions, where choices are for actions. We choose what we do. We don't choose what we want. You just have wants. So this is why Locke is a compatibilist. Locke is a compatibilist because Locke can admit that our desires are determined by a deterministic world, and that we have no control over our desires, but nevertheless Locke thinks that we can be free, and so therefore more responsible. We can hold people accountable for their actions by putting people in jail and so on. We can be free because not because the will is free. The will is not free. The will is determined by the natural world, by our animal nature. But for Locke, our actions are free as long as our actions follow our will in this right sort of way. That if our desires change, then our actions also change. So the happy prisoner is not free, even if they're doing what they want. So in the morning, I get up and I eat cereal, and I have a couple of cereal boxes. I have Honey Nut Cheerios, and I have Captain Crunch, and I have Cocoa Puffs, and those are all boxes sitting on my refrigerator, and I have a free choice here, and what my free choice means is that I can choose whichever one of these I want. If I want Cocoa Puffs, then I can eat Cocoa Puffs, and if I want Honey Nut Cheerios, then I can eat Honey Nut Cheerios, and I can nothing is stopping me from doing what I want. I guess if I want a cereal that I don't currently have, then I have to go to the store, and that sort of is a constraint on choosing anything else. But I have some options here, and I have a free choice among these options. But I'm not so when I wake up in the morning and I choose what cereal to eat, what I usually I think is I do a little bit of introspection. I think, what cereal do I want? And I reflect on my desires. And after maybe thinking about it for a second, I might think, oh, you know what, I want Cocoa Puffs today. This is I'm in the mood for Cocoa Puffs today. In that choice, this is Locke's idea is that I'm reflecting on my desires. I have some desire. Maybe it's a little subtle, and I have to sort of meditate for a second and think about what my desires are. But once I reflect and pull that desire out of my subconscious mind, then I can choose to act on it, right? So I want Cocoa Puffs, and so I act on it by pouring myself a bowl of Cocoa Puffs. And this action is free on Locke's view, because if I had wanted something, if I had wanted Captain Crunch, then I would have eaten Captain Crunch, and there was nothing blocking me from eating Captain Crunch, right? So the situation would be unfree if, for instance, I wanted Captain Crunch, but every time I reached for the Captain Crunch, someone batted it out of my hand and said, no, you can't do that. Well, now I'm not free anymore because I have a want, but I'm not able to act on that desire. So someone's impeding me from acting on that desire. But in a situation when there's no one stopping me from eating that cereal, then I'm free. But the freedom isn't a freedom to choose what desire I have. This morning I woke up wanting Cocoa Puffs. Some other mornings I wake up wanting Captain Crunch. Locke's going to say, I didn't choose those desires, I just have those desires. These are just wants that I have. I just wake up having some wants sometimes, and different wants different times. What makes me free or not is whether those actions, whether those desires result in actions, whether I can actually act on those desires. Okay. So here's a little diagram or model of this sort of Lockean perspective, and I'm going to call this a BDI, a rational BDI agent, and the BDI here stands for beliefs, desires, and intentions. So it's kind of a little feedback loop, but the idea is that so the stuff up here takes place in the mind, and stuff out here takes place in the world. We get inputs from the world in terms of perceptions or experiences, and then we act in the world. And so our perceptions, experiences, and our actions are in the world, you might think. But then we have these sort of mental activity. We have beliefs about the world, what's in the world, what the world is like. We have beliefs about sort of how the world works. And then we also have desires, things that we want. I want $1 million. I want to be a doctor or fireman, whatever. The idea of the BDI agent is that we have some beliefs and we have some desires, and what reason amounts to, what it means to be rational, is that we do things or make actions. We form intentions. We do things. We perform actions in ways that help us satisfy our desires. So we use the things that we know about the world in order to figure out ways of satisfying our desires. So, for instance, maybe I want pizza. I also believe that there's companies that will deliver pizza to me if I call them and tell them what to deliver. But I also have to pay them. by considering my desires in light of my beliefs. I have a bunch of beliefs. I also have a bunch of desires that I want satisfied, and so I form intentions. I form a will that tries to maximally satisfy these desires. For Locke, all animals do this. This is not just for. I'm sorry. For Locke, all animals have desires. Maybe they have beliefs to some extent. But all animals have desires, and then they act in the world in order to satisfy those desires. What makes humans unique is that we have these rational capacities to think very abstractly about different beliefs, and even to think abstractly about our desires and our actions in ways that allow us to do a lot more stuff. And free will is just if the desires and actions correspond in the right sort of way. Your actions are voluntary if you're doing what you want, if you can act on your desires. So freedom is the ability to do otherwise. You know you're free if, as your desires change, your actions also change. Your desires are entirely determined by the natural law, so therefore your desires are not free. You can't choose your will. You don't have a free will. Locke is a compatibilist. He's also a determinist, and he does not think that the will is free. He thinks that determinism is true and that you get your will by these determined natural processes. But nevertheless, your actions can be free if they're in accord with your will. And because your actions can be free, you can also be held responsible for your actions, both morally and practically. We can throw you in jail for your actions. And so therefore, we have a robust sense of moral responsibility despite a deterministic world. So this is a compatibilist view. Compatibilism is true. I already have talked about the prisoner in their cell. The other example that I like here is the grading in my office. So imagine that I'm grading in my office. I have a big stack of grading to do. I want to get grades back to my students. And to be clear, I might have competing desires. So I want to be a good teacher. I want to grade these papers and return the papers in a prompt fashion so that my students have the best education possible. So I have a desire to satisfy. I have a desire to be a good teacher and to help my students. I also have desires for other things. I would rather be playing video games right now. I would rather be doing a billion other things than grading. So grading is among my desires, but I have other competing desires, and sometimes one desire wins out over another. But imagine that I'm really intent on grading tonight, and I sort of blocked out time, and I went to my office on campus maybe in order to do work without any distractions from home. And I'm planning on pulling an all-nighter. I'm going to be grading all night in my office, so I'm really dedicated to the grading. It's what I want to do. It's my strongest desire. And then I act on it, and I'm in my office grading. And so I'm doing what I want. It seems like I'm free. Imagine, though, that because it's overnight, the janitor comes by and doesn't notice that I'm in the room and locks my door from the outside, so I can't actually leave my office. I'm actually trapped in my office. So it seems like I was doing what I wanted to do, and so I was free, but as soon as the janitor came by and locked my door, I suddenly become unfree. But here's the thing, I don't even need to notice that this happens, so I become unfree, but imagine that I have my headphones on and I'm listening to music and I'm in the zone grading and I don't even notice the door got locked. Nevertheless, so I'm still doing what I want. There's almost no change to my experiences, there's no change to my actions, but what did change is my condition, my situation. Now I'm suddenly locked in the room, so I'm still doing what I want, but now if my desires change, like say I want to go to the bathroom, I can't do it anymore because I'm locked in the room. I might not notice that for a while. I might not notice that my freedom has been deprived of me, from me. But the freedom here is very clear. It's something that other people outside me can impact. The janitor locking me in the room had a big impact on my freedom. I'm no longer as free as I was because of something someone else did. Maybe something someone else did that I didn't even notice. And so, but imagine I continue to not notice it, and I keep grading all the way through to the next morning, and then the morning janitor comes by and unlocks all the doors, and now I'm free again. If I never noticed that whole process happened, then I would never have noticed a change to my own freedom. I would have thought that I was free the entire time doing exactly what I want, when in fact my freedom was changed dramatically, unbeknownst to me, by the janitors locking and unlocking the door. So hopefully this demonstrates that freedom in Locke's sense it's not simply about an internal sensation or an internal feeling. It's really about how your will, how your desires are reflected in your actions or not, or fail to be reflected in your actions. And for Locke, this gets all of the important cases right about like prisoners in cells. The prisoner is not free, or at least they're not free in a lot of respects, because there's all these constraints in their actions, and they simply can't do what they want. This notion of freedom is going to be very influential, as I said earlier, in the political revolutions, in the notion of freedom that informs the political revolutions like the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So it's precisely this kind of constraint on action that's at bottom of this political notion of freedom. Okay, we're almost done. This is going to be a little bit shorter than previous videos, but this is maybe one of the harder parts of this video. So Frankfurt, Harry Frankfurt, Frankfurt's papers in the reading list. Harry Frankfurt is a compatibilist, and he's a compatibilist in Locke's style, where he has a view of action and a view of the goal of freedom that's very similar to Locke's. But Frankfurt's going to disagree with Locke on a particular issue, a very central issue to Locke, which is this idea that you can't choose your desires. So Frankfurt's going to argue against Locke for a different kind of compatibilism, where an agent is free not only if they're doing what they want, but also if they're able to choose what they want in a particular way. So Frankfurt's examples all have to do with addiction in various ways. And Frankfurt's worry in particular is that the addict seems to be a little bit like the case of me grading, or the case of the prisoner who wants to be in prison, where the addict is doing what they want the whole time. So an addict who has let's say an addiction to cigarettes, they're addicted to cigarettes, they have a strong craving for cigarettes, and when they smoke cigarettes, they're doing what they want. They're just satisfying their desires, they're satisfying their strong craving. But it seems like even though they're doing exactly what they want, it doesn't seem like they're free. And it doesn't seem like Locke's account can handle the way that they're not free. So Locke's view is that an agent is free if they're acting on their desires, and if their desires were different, their actions would also be different. So it seems like the addict is acting on their desires. They want the nicotine in the cigarette, so they're doing what they want. But it also seems like if the addict's desires were different, if they didn't want the nicotine, then yeah, maybe they wouldn't smoke. So that seems also the case. So it seems like on the Lockean count of just being able to do otherwise, the addict is still free. But it seems like, okay, well, if the addict had different desires, maybe they would do differently. But the thing about addiction is that they don't have different desires, is that they can't control their desires. And it seems like the inability to control their desires really is a constraint on their freedom. That the addict, especially an addict who wants to quit but still keeps smoking because they have this strong craving, it seems like they're not free in a very strong sense. And it seems like Locke can't account for how they're not free because they're doing exactly what they want. There's this would have done otherwise structure to their action. And Locke, on Locke's count, you can be determined in your desires, right? Your desires can be entirely determined even by someone other than you, and you can still be free. So Frankfurt thinks that this doesn't make a lot of sense. Frankfurt doesn't like this aspect of Locke's account. Frankfurt wants to give a view of freedom where not only are we responsible for our actions, but we're also responsible for our will. And so I'm giving this view just to give us a more modern take on the sort of Lockean view, so you can see how these views mature. I don't personally endorse Frankfurt's view. This is not my own view, but it is a rather complicated theoretical view, and the idea is just to give you another sense of compatibilism, a sort of different flavor of compatibilism. But it's going to be complicated. This is going to be a little bit technically complicated. So what Frankfurt does is distinguish between first and second order desires. So first order desire and second order desire has to do with what the desire is about. So a first order desire is a desire for something. I want X. I want a cigarette. I want to go to the movies. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a fireman. I want to have grandchildren. Whatever. You have desires for things, for states of affairs, for particular objects. And a first order desire is just a desire for something. All the different kinds of desires that you want, you might have this kind of first order desire for. Also, animals have first order desires. When my cat wants food, that's also a first order desire. It's a desire for some particular thing. But Frankfurt says, okay, we have first order desires, but we also have these second-order desires. A second-order desire is a desire about your desires. So it's a second order because it's not just a desire for something else. So in the sense, it's like any other desire in the sense that you want something. But what makes it a second-order desire is that the thing that you want is something about your desires. So I have up here, I want to want X. It's a little bit confusing. This is why this is a technical thing. So I want to want X. Which this is a desire. The idea here is that my desire, my want, is directed at my wants. So a desire directed at another desire. So maybe back to the example of me grading. My big desire is that I want to be a good teacher. Like this is maybe the motivating desire for my grading. But I also have all these competing desires, and in particular, I don't like grading very much. I want to be a good teacher. I want to be there for my students and give good feedback and so on. But I don't like grading very much. I find the process of grading boring. I find it very not having a lot of use pedagogically. I don't think it has a big impact on students. And sometimes I'll spend a lot of time grading a paper, have an essay, and I'll write a bunch of notes, a couple of pages of notes to the student, and then I'll give back the paper to the students, and the student will flip and look at their grade. Oh, they got an A, and then they'll just throw the paper in the trash and never read any of my notes. And it just like rips my heart out, and I hate doing it. And every time I'm grading, I don't know that the student's going to read those grades at all. And so like I have this a very strong desire not to grade. But I also want to be a good teacher, and I want to be there for my students and give good feedback and so on. And these two things are in conflict, and it makes things difficult for me as a teacher. In particular, the process of grading is always this big struggle. And I want to grade the papers. Like I want to get the job done. It's something I want to do. But I also don't want to grade the papers. Like it's something I don't. So I have these conflicting first order desires. But I also have these other desires, like I want to be a good teacher. And these other desires make me want to prefer some of my first order desires over others. So I don't like grading. I have to grade, so I want to grade. But I really wish I wanted to grade more. I really wish I liked grading. Grading, being a teacher, would be so much easier if I just enjoyed the process of grading. I want to grade because I want to do my teaching job, but I also don't want to grade. And these are first order desires that are in conflict. But I might also form this second order desire about this conflict and say, I really wish I wasn't so conflicted. I really wish I just liked to grade. I really wish grading were among my desires. So I have desires for things. I also have desires about my desires. These are the second order desires. Frankfurt also talks in the paper, and this, again, it gets confusing, but Frankfurt also talks about volitions. So the volition is not just a desire, but the volition is the desire that's effective in action. So I have a bunch of wants. Sometimes these wants go against each other. Sometimes, I want to eat the cake, but I also don't want to eat the cake. And the volition is the desire that I actually act on. So if I want to eat the cake, but I also don't want to eat the cake, and I end up not eating cake, then the desire that I acted on was the desire that I don't want cake. That doesn't mean that I don't have the desire that I want cake. I do want cake, but my desire to not want cake was stronger. That was the volition that I ended up acting on. So the volition. So you have your will is like the structure of desires, where it's a ranked structure of desires. Some of them are stronger than others. And then the volition is the strongest desire that you actually act on. But we also have second order desires, and the second order desires are desires about my desires. And I also have a second order volition. The second order volition is the desire that some desire be effective in action. So it's not just the desire that's effective in action, that's the volition, that's the first order volition. But the second order volition is the desire that some desire be effective in action. So it's not just that I want to grade, I also don't want to grade. But then I have the second order desire that I really wish that I wanted to grade. I really want to grade more. I really wish that I loved grading. But I can have that second order desire as just another second order desire among lots of other second order desires. But I can also have it as a second order volition, which is that I want that desire to be effective in action. Like maybe I'm gonna start doing things to make the grading process better. maybe I'll reward myself after grading and give myself a treat. Maybe I'll break up the grading sessions into small chunks. Maybe I'll plan out some music for when I'm grading so it's a little better of a process. Maybe I'll redesign my assignments so that the student work is better and it's not as hard to grade. Right? There's lots of things I can do to make me want grading more. And maybe having those desires be effective in action can actually get me to the place I want to be. And this is what is important for Frankfurt about these second-order desires, is that the second-order desires, in some sense, they tell you about your real wants, and maybe even more, they tell you about how you identify yourself. So you're free if you really want to be. So for Frankfurt, my second-order volition says something deep about my own identity. And it's because I identify with that volition that it matters to me whether I act in that way or fail to act in that way. Frankfurt thinks that animals have desires. They have first-order desires. My cat wants things. It doesn't want other things. And maybe some animals have second-order desires as well. But what Frankfurt says is no animal has second-order volitions. No animal actually cares about the structure of its will, at least in the same way that humans do. Animal, my cat wants food or, wants to play. It has different desires. Sometimes one desire is stronger than another. But my cat doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about its own desires and what it wants its desires to be. My cat doesn't think about like the kind of cat it wants to be. Like, some cats are fat and lazy, and some cats are active and play a lot. And maybe my cat has preferences to be one way sometimes and the other way different times. But my cat does not spend a lot of time thinking about which of these desires does it want to have. My cat doesn't think about what kind of life it wants to live. For Frankfurt, this is something that's unique to persons, that what characterizes persons and what makes persons different from animals, and not just different from animals, but also different from young children, maybe different from people with severe mental handicaps, or people in a long-term coma. Right, these people maybe still have desires and needs and wants in some sense. A baby, wants its bottle or whatever. They have wants, but they don't think about their wants in any kind of structured way. They don't have desires about their wants. It's the unique situation of people that we can think not just about what we want to do, but about what we want to want, and in some sense what we want to be. So Frankfurt's example of this is the unwilling addict. So there's the addict the addict has a craving for cigarettes. You can also imagine an addict who wants to quit. So an addict who wants their cigarette has an addiction. They also have a competing desire that they want to quit. They know it's bad for them. They have these rational understanding that they should quit. So the addict wants the drug and doesn't want the drug. And maybe the addict is just like an animal, where sometimes they act according to one desire and sometimes they act according to a different desire, and it just depends on what day it is. But for persons, we actually can think about these desires. They might matter to us. They might be central to how we identify them ourselves. And so this is the case with the unwilling addict. So the unwilling addict has a craving for the drug. They also want to quit. But they also have a second-order desire. Like, they really want to... They really wish they wanted to quit more. It's not just that they want to quit as, like, a thing that they know that they should want among all the other things that they want. But it's that they want to quit and that they really think that it's super important for them to get healthy, to get off this addiction, to reform their life. Maybe it's interfering with their ability to relate to their child, or something like that, or maybe it's causing a elderly relative health complications because they're smoking inside, or something like this. Right, so they want to quit, but the unwilling addict also has a second-order desire that the desire that they quit be their strongest desire. So it's not just that they want to quit, but they also wish that the desire to quit was their strongest desire. It was one that was effective in action. And it's because the unwilling addict has this second-order volition, Frankfurt thinks, that the unwilling addict can genuinely be free, not just because they're able to act on their desires, but because, in some sense, they're setting what their desires are. They're committing to one way of desiring versus another. And because they're, in some sense, choosing their desires, or choosing what structure of desire, what the structure of their will should be, it's precisely because they have this choice about the structure of their will that they're able to be free or not. So the unwilling addict, if they really want to have if they wish their desire to resist their drug was their strongest desire, and then they actually did that, and they actually avoided smoking, they were actually able to keep it effective in action, that this is a real kind of freedom, because they're not just satisfying their desires, but they're satisfying their second-order desires, what they really, really want, sort of what they want, what they identify with. Whereas, when the unwilling addict fails to act on that strongest desire and succumbs to their addiction, there's, in some sense, a great tragedy there, because they're not just succumbing to a desire, but they're violating their own sense of identity. It's what they really want. So, in the same way, sort of apart from the addiction, I want to be a good teacher, and so I want to do the grading, but I also don't want to do the grading, and I'd rather play video games. But if I'm able to control myself and sit down there and do the grading, not only have I satisfied my desire to do the grading, but I've also satisfied my self-conception of myself as a good teacher. I've done what I want to do. Not just that I've done the action that I want to do, but I've become the person, or I've become the person that I want to be. I've secured the structure of my will to be what I want that structure to be, where I'm grading as my most important priority. And at the same time, if I fail to do that, right, if I have this big thing of grading, but I end up just playing video games all day, in some sense I've failed myself, not just because I did something that I didn't really want, because I also did want to play video games. I did what I wanted to do. I played video games. That's exactly what I wanted to do. But I failed myself in the sense I failed my self-conception, my conception of myself as being a good teacher, as I wanted to be a good teacher. But wanting to be a good teacher requires prioritizing grading, and I failed to do that. So in some sense, I failed my own self-identity. And this is what's possible for the unwilling addict. They're able to actually make good on that identity, or they might fail that identity. And that's exactly what the freedom or lack of freedom amounts to. So it's precisely because the unwilling addict has a second-order desire that they can also fail to realize that second-order desire and therefore be unfree. When the unwilling addict succumbs to their addiction, in some sense, they haven't really done what they wanted themselves to do, and so they've acted unfreely. Animals can't do this, right? It's precisely because my cat doesn't have any great conception of itself, right? It doesn't have any plans for its own life. It doesn't conceive of its own will in any sort of way. It's precisely because my cat doesn't have these kinds of self-conceptions that it's just not free. That when it's acting, it's always acting on its immediate desires, and it's never acting on a reflection of what it wants its desires to be. So my cat just eats because it likes food, and maybe gets fat, but there's never a conflict between the fat cat and the cat's own conception or plans for itself, because the cat just doesn't have those conceptions or plans. It doesn't have these second-order desires. Now, notice that all of this is completely compatible with a deterministic universe. First of all, it's compatible in the same way that Locke is compatible, right? Locke thinks that we just inherit our desires. For Frankfurt, maybe we inherit our desires too. In particular, maybe we inherit our second-order desires. For instance, maybe there's something about the structure of cognition or the structure of the brain that gives us certain desires, and it also gives us certain kinds of second-order desires. But that's all fine for Frankfurt. Frankfurt doesn't really care what the desires, the sort of mechanical process that generates these desires. Again, just like with Locke, the issue is, do my desires or do the structure of my will match my actions? And what the difference between Frankfurt and Locke is just that the structure of will is a lot more complicated for Frankfurt's case, because he's got these levels of desires. In fact, I have a where'd it go? Here it is. So this is the more complicated Frankfurt version of the same diagram as we had for Locke. So in some ways, this is the exact same diagram as Locke. It's still just a little belief, desire, intention machine. Here's the world, here's the mind, belief, desire, intention. But for Locke, the desires were very simple. I just have desire for various things. And the question is, do those desires actually match my actions? For Frankfurt, what we're doing is we're radically complicating the structure of desire, or the structure of the will. So we have, first of all, these two these two, the first order and second order desire. This is just sort of making in a diagram structure the things that we already talked about. So just reviewing again. So I have these first order desires for specific things. And then my will is whatever my strongest desire is. So you might think of it as like a pointer to the top of the list. In fact, this whole diagram here, this whole slide, is really a computer science way of thinking about the structure of the will, the way that Frankfurt talks about it. What I'm really doing, if you know programming at all, is I'm constructing a bunch of linked lists. So my first order desires are just a single list of my desires with a pointer at the top of my strongest desires. So if my strongest desire is to eat cake, and then that's my will, and that's what I intend to do. But maybe my strongest desire is something else, and I sort of shuffle around my desires. So the order of my desires is constantly shifting around, and the strongest desire is my will. It's what I end up acting on. So that story is already what Locke is saying. That's the same story that Locke has. But Frankfurt makes it more complicated by adding this second order desire. And remember, the second order desires are desires about desires. They're wants for the structure of my wants. Right? So they're wants pointed at other wants I have. And so the way you can imagine this is you can imagine my first order desires are just a list of my wants. And what my second order desires do is it imagines a bunch of sort of parallel lists of wants that I might have. Right? So I might have this list of wants with this want or with this desire at the top as the strongest desire. So here's one list of desires. That's exactly sort of parallel with my first order list of desires. But what my second order desires are doing is determining which of these lists I want. So I have a bunch of these lists that have different orders of arrangements. And what my second order desire is, and potentially my second order volition, is choosing among these lists of ranked desires. So we have one list of ranked desires, that's the actual desire that I act on. But then I can also imagine lots of different rankings of my desires. And so maybe in this first list, the strongest desire is to smoke. And maybe in the second list, the strongest desire is to not smoke. And so these are two different lists, and which of these lists actually become my desires, actually become my will, determines what I end up doing, right? If it's this list that's structuring my will, then I'm going to smoke because that's the strongest desire in this list. But if it's this list that's structuring my will, then I won't smoke because that's the strongest desire in this list. And you can imagine sort of lots of these different ranked lists. And my second order desires is choosing among these ranked lists as which list is really what I want to do from the second order. So you might think, I prefer that my desires were ranked like this rather than this. So for the unwilling addict, the unwilling addict has a bunch of desires. Among their first order desires include a desire to smoke and a desire not to smoke. And those desires can be ranked in a bunch of different ways. So their second order desires are different rankings of these desires. And the unwilling addict wants this list to be the one that's effective in action because that's the one that's going to result in them not smoking. So the unwilling addict has a second order desire that they don't smoke. And so the question is, well, what does this unwilling addict actually do? If the unwilling addict has this as their second order desire, but when they actually go out in the world, they pick up the cigarette and start smoking, the desire that they acted on their will was not the one that they wanted their will to be. They wanted their will to be the one where they're not smoking, but their actual will, what they actually acted on, was the desire to smoke. And so here we have a direct conflict between their desires and their second order desires. Their second order desire to not smoke was not able to be effective in action. It did not become the action. And so this is just what it means to not be free, is that when your desires don't reflect your second order desires, when you're not able to make your second order desires effective in action, or in other words, when your second order desires fail to become your will. So the unwilling addict, when they give in to the smoking, is not free. The unwilling addict, when they succeed in not smoking, is free, and it's partly because they're not only deciding what to do, what will to act on, or what desire to act on, but they're also deciding what they want the structure of their will to be, what they want their desires to be. So in this sense, they're choosing their desires. They're not choosing what desires they have, but they're choosing how to rank those desires. And it's precisely because we can make these choices in the ranking of our desires that we're able to be free or not free. Again, a child, so my cat does not choose among ranked orders of desires. It just has desires and it acts on them. Same thing for like a small child. A little 3-year-old child might be throwing a temper tantrum because it wants something. It wants a toy. Those desires are influencing its actions, but the child is not thinking about the kind of child that it wants to be. It's not thinking about morality in any great sense. It's much closer to the way the animal's acting, where it's just acting on its desires. So it's the unique domain of persons. What it is to be a person is to have this kind of second-order volition. Persons can think about what they want. They can act on what they want or fail to act on what they want. And this matters for persons because we have this kind of relationship to our desires. Maybe not all persons act like this. So sometimes this is a little bit difficult, but philosophers talk about persons in a way that's different from just human beings. So as we already suggested, maybe young children are not persons. Young children is a human being, and maybe we have some ethical obligations to human beings generally, even young children. But when philosophers use the word person, they usually are not just meaning human. It's not because they're imagining robots or aliens or something, but it's because they're excluding certain kinds of humans from the domain of persons, like young children or the people in a coma. Someone in a coma is not reflecting on the structure of their desires. They're still biologically human. Maybe they're still alive, but they're not a person. So this is how Frankfurt is using the term person. Is this sort of exclusive term. And just as persons are differentiated from animals, they're also differentiated from young kids. But there might be adult humans that are not persons, or at least in certain choices are not persons in this way. And Frankfurt calls these kind of persons wantons. So the example that we've been dealing with so far is the unwilling addict. There's the addict. They have desires. Their desires are conflicted, and they have to make a choice about what to do. So for Frankfurt, the unwilling addict is a person is potentially free if they're able to act the way that they want. But we should contrast the person here with the wanton. So wanton is someone who doesn't care about the structure of their will, is a rational actor, a human being, who doesn't care about the structure of their will, doesn't care what they want, has no second-order desires. They have desires, they have first-order desires, so this is not someone who doesn't want anything. A wanton has wants, and in fact, a wanton might be very hedonistic in pursuing very sort of animalistic desires. The thing about the wanton is that they don't care about their desires. They have desires, but they don't care what those desires are. So someone who smokes but doesn't think about their smoking, it never occurs to them that their smoking might be an issue that they need to think about, right? So the characteristic of the unwilling addict that we've been talking about is that they want to stop smoking, and then the struggle was, can they beat their addiction? But the wanton just doesn't care about smoking. Maybe they know that smoking is bad in some sense, but it's not something that has any influence over their actions. They just don't care, and they don't see a wanton doesn't see any need to structure their desires in some way. They just have desires and they act on them. So for Frankfurt, a wanton is an adult human non-person. And they're a non-person precisely because they've given up on this capacity for freedom that's characteristic of persons. Persons have second-order volitions. Persons care about what the structure of their will is, and the structure of their will is an issue for them. That doesn't mean that a person always does what they want, because sometimes people can be unfree. And the lack of freedom is precisely this mismatch between what they want for themselves and what they actually do. But only persons can be free. A wanton, in some sense, can't be free because they don't really care. So someone who just does drugs and never thinks about their drug use, never contemplates, whether they want to be the kind of person that does drugs, how they see drugs fitting in their life. Or someone who never thinks about this, for Frankfurt, they might as well be an animal because they're just acting on their immediate desires. They're not persons, and they're neither free nor unfree. They're just acting on desires. It's only someone who is confronting their condition, confronting the nature of their choices and the structure of their will, that are persons and so can be free or unfree. So I've talked about my cat a little bit. Maybe my cat is sick and had to go to the vet and had a surgery or something, so they have to wear a cone so they don't bite it there at their wound. The cat clearly does not like the cone, so there's a desire against using the cone. But the cat is not unfree when it wears the cone. In some sense, the cat is not doing what it wants. It would rather not wear the cone. But the cat is not unfree because freedom is not even an issue for the cat under Frankfurt's view, because the cat is not engaged in the project of choosing what its desires should be. The cat is merely acting on its desires. So right now it can't act on its desires. So there's a sense in which it's unfree, but this is not true sort of personhood freedom of the sort that only people can have when they actually interact with their, when they actually think about what they want. I have child's car seats written there, and I don't remember what that example is. Oh, I guess the car seat is just like the cat cone. So when you put a child in a car seat, they might not want to be there. They might scream and yell about being in the car seat. And it's true that it goes against their desire. They have a desire to not be in the car seat. That's true. But in some sense, we're not taking away any freedom from the child by putting them in the car seat, even if it's something that they don't want. In the same way that I'm not really taking any freedom away from the cat by putting it in a cone, because the cat's not thinking about their own freedom in that sense, and neither is the child. So it is a constraint on the child to put it in the car seat. Like as a practical matter, it's a practical constraint on their freedom, but it's not a constraint on their freedom in the moral sense, because the child's not in a position to be making moral decisions about its own actions, because it's not conceiving of its actions in this way. So cat cones and car seats are not contrary to freedom on Frankfurt's view. They're contrary to a certain kind of practical ability, but they're not contrary to the freedom that has the moral sense in the way that Frankfurt means it. Here's another example, though, with adults. This is the example of going bowling versus going to the movies. So imagine I have a bunch of friends, and imagine that we're still in a time where you can go out with your friends. The good old days when you can go out with your friends. Okay, so imagine that your friends have plans. There's like a big group of them, and they're trying to decide between going bowling or going to the movies. Some of your friends want to go bowling. I guess that's the thing people do, maybe in New Jersey. Some people want to go to the movies. And then they ask you, like, say the group is split. Some want to go to the movies, some want to go bowling. And then they come to you and say, okay, you got to decide, what are we going to do? What are we going to do for the night? And they come up to you, and imagine that you would not mind doing both of these things, that you have desire to go bowling, you also have desire to see a movie. These are both things that you want to do. But you don't have strong opinions about it. You don't really want to do one or the other. And so your response when they come to you with this choice is, I'm up for anything. It doesn't matter what we do. You all decide for me. I'm not going to make the choice. I'll go along with anything. This is the idea. So this is the person. So imagine I make this. I say I don't want to decide. I don't want to decide this one or the other. I'll just do whatever the crowd wants. It seems like a nice sort of sentiment. It seems like someone who is trying to be cooperative with the group and helping the group make a choice. Maybe it would be better for the group if I made the choice. But I'm not trying to demand that people act my way or anything. Maybe I'm trying to be accommodating by saying, I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. I don't want it to be up to me. Why don't you all decide for me? But here's one of the things. If I both want to bowl and go to the movies, and I have no second order desire choosing between these, so what I'm saying is, when I say it doesn't matter to me, I'll do whatever you all want. When I say that, part of what I'm giving up is my choice in the matter. And the reason I'm giving up this choice is because I don't really have a strong second-order desire. Like, maybe I want both bowling and the movies, but I can also imagine someone who really wants movies more than bowling, and so they wish not only so they both, maybe they like both of them, but they want movies more, and then they also have the second-order desire that I wish that everyone wants to go to the movies, or something like that, where the second-order desire is about what the group's desires are. So in this case, this person has a really it's not that they don't want to go to bowling, but it's that they really want to go to the movies, and that's what they're identified and committing to. And so when the group decides to go to the movies, this person's going to be really happy. And when if instead the group decides to go bowling, this person's going to be really upset. Not just because they're not doing what they want. The person still wants to go bowling, but they're not doing what they want at the second order, what they want to want. So if you have a weighted preference, second-order desire, one way or the other, that will change how you react to the decision either way. But in my case, I'm being ambivalent. I'm saying I don't really want one thing over the other. I'll do whatever the group decides. And in this case, I'm giving up my freedom to choose, but I'm also giving up my second-order desires about which choice matters to me, or how these choices matter to me. Effectively, I'm saying it doesn't matter to me. So effectively, in this choice, I'm putting myself in the position of a wanton. I'm saying that I'm sort of giving up my freedom. It doesn't matter to me which we choose. I'll go either way. So I've given up my freedom to do whatever the group wants. In some ways, this is a wantonly act. You might think also that it's not like a morally reprehensible act. In fact, it seems like a cooperative act, like a sort of team player kind of act. And so how can it be so bad to say, well, I don't want to choose? But the idea is that you're giving up. What's bad about it is that you've given up, what happens in your life. Your evening plans are no longer being set through your active participation. They're being set through the demands of others. And so you might think that the issue here is not that you want the bad thing. It's that you're not guided by your own wants in the first place, that you're not free. So maybe it's okay to not be free sometimes. Maybe if we're deciding what to do, it's okay that we're not doing as a group what I want to do. But maybe this is but it's the kind of case where this sort of freedom comes up, and the importance of being able to choose at the second order versus being a wanton. Maybe that is a little more clear from that example. I don't know. Okay. I've been going on too long. Here's this big Frankfurt thing. Okay, so both Frankfurt and Locke have this BDI psychology view, this beliefs, desire, and intentions view. And these are very popular. They've been around for a long time. They're still popular. Frankfurt, he might have died just recently, but Frankfurt's views were popular in like the 70s and 80s. So these views are still around. But you might be unhappy with this BDI view. Well, this one is particularly complicated, but even if we go back here, that it looks maybe that this is oversimplifying things about action, that maybe actions aren't the neat results of intentions and desires and beliefs and so on. In particular, the structure of the mind on this model, where we have concrete beliefs and concrete desires that get satisfied through rationality, through the construction of rational intentions, through construction of a rational will. Like it's a nice story, but maybe it's too neat. Maybe there's not a lot of scientific justification for this. The structure of the brain doesn't look like it takes the form of beliefs and desires and intentions. No one has pointed to what the beliefs look like in the brain. You might even be skeptical you can find beliefs in the brain, or that this is the right unit of analysis for understanding how the brain works. Sometimes BDI psychology is called propositional attitude psychology, because the idea is that each belief, desire, or intention takes a proposition as an object. So I want something, or I believe something. So I believe it is raining. I do not want to get wet. So I intend to bring an umbrella. So I believe it is raining. It is raining is a sentence. It's a proposition. So the idea is that my belief is of a proposition. My desire, I do not want to get wet, so I want to not get wet. Getting wet, or the idea is that I am wet or I am not wet, is another proposition, and I can have a desire towards that proposition. So propositional attitude psychology is the attitudes that we take towards propositions, like believing them or disbelieving them, desiring them or not desiring them, intending them or not intending them. Right? So these are attitudes we take towards propositions, and the idea is, this was a popular view in the mid-20th century, that the way that the psychology works, the way that the mind works, is by relating propositional-like beliefs to propositional-like desires and sort of crunching them through a propositional calculus in order to generate intentions, which are somehow turned into actions. So this propositional attitude psychology was very popular for a long time. This is sort of what it means to be rational. But you might think, look, we're not really rational in this way. The brain doesn't really work in terms of these beliefs, desires, intentions. This is all a very nice story, but it's not very explanatory about what we actually do. You might also think that there are I guess this relates to the difficulties with neuroscience, is that the conception of freedom described by these BDI theories is really this conception of freedom that is situated in the scientific revolutions, or worrying about morality and mechanisms. And maybe if that's not how brain science works today, then maybe this whole framework is not very good for understanding how freedom works in the first place. So there are problems with this sort of BDI view. Oh boy. The Kant view is next. I'm going to go through this very quickly. I'm not going to do a great job with the Kant view, but I want to put it on the table because it really is important to understanding autonomy as it arises in the history of philosophy. So just to remind you, with the Kant view, I went over a lot of this stuff in some detail at the end of the consciousness video in Unit 1. And Kant's view is this transcendental view where he's interested in what must be the case for certain phenomena to be explained. And so this kind of reasoning about what must be the case or what must be true, this transcendental argument, Kant applies this transcendental argument all over the place about what must be true for cognition to work, about what must be true for consciousness to seem the way that it does. He also applies this to the moral world. He applies this to biology. And in the moral world is maybe most relevant here, where so the way that Kant understands morality is that an action is moral if it accords with the universal law. So the universal law of morality governs all of morality. Breaking the universal law is obviously against morality. Kant doesn't tell you what the universal moral law is. What he tells you is that any choice you make must be compatible with the universal law, and you can test that compatibility by trying to universalize your actions, right? So the example I gave in the other video is like you want to cheat on a test. So I want to cheat on a test. That's my reason for action. I have a desire to do well on this test, so I'm going to act in a way that I'm cheating to make sure that I didn't study, so I'm going to cheat in order to do well on this test because I want to do well, and that'll satisfy my desire. But then the question is, okay, well, is that a moral action? Are you morally allowed to do that? And Kant says the way that you test if your action is moral is to see whether it's compatible with the universal law. So you have your action, I want to cheat on this test, and what you want to see is what happens if we universalize that. So what happens if we make that law, what happens if we make your reason for action the universal law of the land that everyone has to act by? So my action was that I want to cheat on this test because I want to do well. So what happens if everyone who wants to do well on a test cheats? Obviously people want to do well on tests. Everyone wants to do well on a test. So what happens if everyone who takes a test cheats? Right, so this is the universalizing move. What happens if everyone acts the way that I want to act? And Kant says, well, if everyone acts this way, then no one would give tests anymore because people know that everyone's cheating on tests. And the only reason you give a test is to genuinely test someone's capacities. And if you know that everyone's going to cheat on a test, then it's not really testing their capacities, and so that people wouldn't give tests anymore. And if people wouldn't give tests anymore, then you couldn't cheat on a test because there would be no test to cheat on. So by this universalizing move, it becomes clear that your ability to act on that maximum, act on that reason, your ability to cheat on that test, depends on everyone else behaving in a different way. Right? You cheating on the test requires that no one else cheats on the test. It's only if most people who take tests take them legitimately that you can sneak in there and try to cheat on the test. But this is exactly to violate the universal moral law. Like the only way that this becomes possible is if you do something that no one else can do. And this is what Kant thinks the universal moral law is just the limit of what you can rationally do. You're not an exception to the universal moral law, so you should not act in ways that require treating yourself as an exception to the universal moral law. Kant says act on only those maxims that you can will at the same time to become universal law without contradiction. Right? So if you're acting on a maxim that requires people act differently from you, then you're acting in an immoral way. To be clear, and I mentioned this last time, but Kant isn't saying that everyone must act the same way. He's not saying that everyone has to act the same way, or that there's only one way of acting that's moral. In fact, in some ways, Kant is saying the exact opposite. He's saying you can act in any way you want, but for that way to be moral, you have to test whether that thing can be universalized. So categorical imperative is the way that he does this. The categorical imperative is just this trying to compare to universal law. Categorical categorical imperative is supposed to be a statement of the universal law, but the statement is just categorical imperative itself. So the word categorical means that there are no exceptions, that you must always do it. So categorical is that it happens all the time, and an imperative is a command. So a categorical imperative is the universal moral law because it's a command that you must follow all the time, and that's just what it means to be the universal moral law. So the contrast case here is with a hypothetical imperative. A hypothetical imperative is hypothetical means that you have to do it sometimes. It's contingent if you do it, depending on certain circumstances. So the categorical imperative you have to do all the time. The hypothetical imperatives are things you do sometimes, depending on circumstances. So the best example of a hypothetical imperative is something like, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. So clap your hands is the command. That's the imperative. Clap your hands. But I'm not just telling everyone to clap their hands. I'm only telling you to clap your hands if you're happy and you know it. So if you're not happy or you don't know it, then you shouldn't clap your hands, right? The command here to clap your hands only applies to people who meet those conditions of being happy and you know it. So here's another hypothetical imperative. If you want to go to, if you want to become a doctor, go to med school. If you want to be a lawyer, go to law school. So go to law school, that's a command. Go to med school, go to med school, that's a command. But I'm not telling everyone to go to med school. I'm not telling everyone to go to law school. I'm saying if you want to be a lawyer, go to law school. So only the people who want to be a lawyer. So this is a hypothetical imperative. It's an imperative, it's a command, but that only applies hypothetically to some people. It only applies to people in a certain condition. This is the hypothetical part. A categorical imperative is not hypothetical. Categorical is the opposite of hypothetical. Categorical imperatives apply always and everywhere universally without exception. So if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, that's a hypothetical imperative. If you want to go to law school, if you want to be a lawyer, go to law school, that's a hypothetical imperative. But the categorical imperative is a universal law with no exceptions. So again, if I want to test, it's not saying that everyone has to act the same. Act however you want, but take your reason for action and then see if you can universalize it. If you can universalize it, then it's moral, it's fine. But if you can't universalize it, in other words, if trying to universalize it results in contradiction where you have to treat yourself as an exception, then it's not a moral action. So cheating on the test requires that I'm treating myself as an exception, that everyone else takes the test legitimately so that I can cheat. And if the only way that I can act this way is treating myself as an exception, then it can't be the universal moral law. It has to be a hypothetical imperative. It can't be the categorical imperative. Okay, so Kant has a bunch of these kinds of ideas for morality. I don't want to get too deep into that, but this gives insight into how Kant is thinking about freedom and free will and autonomy. For Kant, autonomy is at the center of agency, of moral action. Kant is not a dualist. He's not really a dualist. And Kant thinks that the will is not constrained by physical law. He does think that the universe is constrained by physical law. So in some sense, Kant is a determinist. He thinks that there's some things that are causally necessitated. This is how physics works. This is how the natural world works. So Kant is not against determinism in that sense. Kant thinks that determinism is true, at least for the natural world. Natural world doesn't violate the physical laws. Physical laws are the universal rules that govern causal necessity. What Kant says is just that the will doesn't operate in the realm of causal necessity. The will operates in the rational realm, the realm of ideas. So the will is neither determined by physics nor undetermined by physics. The will does something else besides the physics. Maybe the will is the result of brain processes, but what matters for the will is the relationships among our concepts, the relationships among our beliefs and desires. And for Kant, what matters is that the will. For Kant, the physical world is governed by causal necessity. The mental world, noumena, is governed by rational necessity, by laws of reason. One of these laws of reason include the laws of morality. So the little categorical imperative trick that we were doing earlier is an example of a universal constraint on morality, on your actions. So you can't just do anything. You have to do the things that are morally permitted by the universal moral law, by the categorical imperative. So you can't just do anything. you have to conform your action to these constraints, but these are not physical constraints, these are rational constraints, these are constraints of reason. Moreover, these constraints are not external to the will, so it's not that something else or someone else is controlling my will from the outside through these laws of reason. It's not like God is giving me these laws of reason and controlling my behavior that way, or that God is giving universal morality. For Kant, and this is the really important part, for Kant, the constraints on reason are part of the structure of the will, and so these are constraints that come from within the will. They come from the very structure of my own thinking. In the same way, you might remember, in the same way that space and time are necessary conditions for the structure of experience, that the way that I think about or cognize the world requires this framework of space and time. Similarly, the way that I think about my actions requires this framework of reason and morality. And within this framework, actions are fundamentally free. In fact, it's a necessary condition for thinking about my actions at all that I think about them as acting in this free or spontaneous way. Spontaneity means uncaused, that nothing else determines what I do, what I act, the actions that I take, except my will. So this is what Kant means by autonomy, that my actions are determined entirely by my own will, by the structure of my own will, so they're determined entirely by myself. This is autonomy, self-caused action or self-governed action. Remember, the contrast with autonomy is heteronomy. Something is heteronomous if it's being controlled or caused by something outside. So when I push a rock down a hill, eventually the rock is tumbling by itself, but the rock's behavior here is not autonomous because its actions depended on my external influence. So sometimes I might be in a heteronomous situation where I'm acting according to what other people tell me to do. But Kant says I'm also capable of autonomy, which is where my actions are determined entirely by the structure of my will. So it's not that they're undetermined, but it's that they're determined by the will, and the will has a spontaneous structure of where it's free from causal necessity. So let me put it this way. Kant has a similar view about biology, and we talked about this a little bit before. For Kant, a biological system is self-organized, and part of the idea is that I can't help but think about biological systems as alive. So biological systems are also made of mechanical, physical parts, and those physical parts operate according to physical laws and causal necessity for Kant. But when I'm thinking about living creatures, there's another conceptual feature. There's another feature of that concept that is not negotiable when we're talking about biological systems. It's just a necessary condition. When we're talking about physical objects must exist in space and time. For Kant, it's a necessary feature of physical objects, the things that I experience, that they exist in space and time. So space and time are not optional, they're necessary conditions for the structure of experience. Similarly, teleology, telos, Kant argues, is a necessary condition for thinking about living things. In order to think about living systems, you need to be thinking about their purposes, their natural purposes. Again, Kant thinks that biological systems are made of material things, physical things, but those physical things are organized in this way where the different parts of the thing depend on other parts of the thing. And so even though the whole system is governed by these physical laws, the system of the biological organism ends up structuring itself in ways that require an explanation in not just physical terms, but also in teleological terms, in terms of purposes and functions. Right, so that the metabolism produces things for the sake of these other processes, and those processes do other things for the sake of the metabolism, and there's this kind of interdependent self-organization that happens in the biological system. And what Kant is saying is that in order to understand that biological organization, you have to be thinking about the system as a whole as having a teleological structure. So it's not that the teleological structure is in the physics. The teleological structure is really in the concept of life. That what it means to be a living thing is to have a teleological structure. And so when we explain the processes of life, we're explaining it within this framework of teleology. So this is how Kant tries to naturalize teleology, that you can have a mechanical system also be a teleological system if all the parts of that system are interdependent in such a way that the system organizes itself and is its own cause. So this is how Kant talks about self-organization, is something is self-organized when it's the cause of itself. And what does it mean to be the cause of itself? Well, it means that all the parts are doing the functional work for all the other parts, but that only makes sense if we're thinking about the system as having a function in the first place, and that requires this kind of teleological thinking. So again, it's not that the teleology is in the physics, the teleology is in the biology, but we can't conceive of the biology without thinking about it in teleological terms. So it's a necessary condition for the concepts of biology that they're teleological. Hopefully that makes sense. The idea is that the same thing for Kant goes for consciousness, that space and time are pure intuitions, and that the structure of experience requires this background of space and time, and this is part of the self-organizing principle of consciousness. So biological systems are organized mechanical processes, and self-consciousness is a self-organized representational process for Kant. That is, it's this process of getting concepts to build on each other and interact in this interdependent way, such that the whole cognitive process hangs together as a whole, in the same way that the biological system hangs together as a whole. So space and time are part of the necessary conditions for Kant of having a self-conscious experience in the first place. And so just as teleology is a necessary condition for biology, and self-consciousness is a necessary condition for the structure of experience, Kant also says that freedom and spontaneity are necessary conditions for the structure of action, for my ability to conceive of and explain my own actions. I can't help but think of them in terms that are free. Not that they violate physical law. They're constrained by different laws. They're constrained by rational laws, not the physical laws. This is not supposed to be dualistic. Partly it's not supposed to be dualistic because the same physical laws that govern the structure of experience also govern the processes of, also govern my brain, which ultimately govern the processes of reason. So Kant ultimately thinks that these universal laws are all the same law, are all compatible laws that sort of reinforce each other. So there's not two worlds for Kant in the sense of a purely physical and a purely mental world. My mind is informed by and acts to with regard to the structure of experience. The structure of experience which I'm getting from empirical experiences with interactions with the world. Okay, so teleology is necessary for biology, self-consciousness is necessary for cognition, and freedom is necessary for action. So Kant thinks that it's part of the conceptual structure of what an action is, that it's autonomous in this way. It must be the case that I conceptualize my actions as autonomous. So Kant thinks this is a libertarian view. He thinks that this is a view that secures that our actions are not caused by anything other than ourself, that they're genuinely autonomous. This is what it means to be autonomous, is that I'm the cause of my actions. But Kant also does not think that this conflicts with deterministic physical law. In some sense, Kant just thinks that deterministic physical law is irrelevant for understanding the structure of the will. You need to understand the structure of reason and morality to understand the structure of the will, and that's not... Like, there's a relationship with that and physical law, but to some extent it doesn't matter what the physical law is. But that seems, in my mind, to put Kant closer to a compatibilist view. And the literature is pretty clear that Kant has a libertarian view. And I'm not really sure how that goes. If anyone actually knows Kant here, this is probably very unsatisfying and very confused. But if you're looking to dig in deep into a difficult and very important and influential view, Kant's libertarianism is a good place to start. I have linked up here the SEP article to his view of autonomy. like in some sense, this is the core of this class, and I should know this stuff better, and it should be a more smooth discussion of Kant. But unfortunately, I don't know Kant well enough to make this part smooth. I'm just really flagging it that it's at the center of our discussions. And perhaps you can also see from this discussion of teleology and biology how Kant's view ultimately gives rise to something closer to the modern conception of science as being involved with these complex systems that are organized or self-organized in various ways. The thing that systems view does, though, is that it gets us out of the old structure of the debate where we were before worried about were we before worried about determinism in this sort of Newtonian way, where everything happens one after another. What Kant gets us to think about are integrated systems and organized systems and complex systems with lots of different differentiated parts that are all working together to create something at a higher order of organization. This isn't exactly Kant's view, but the systems view might allow for things like emergent properties. So the systems view is going to say that being alive is an emergent property. It's a mechanical property. There's a bunch of mechanical operations, but the living process is not just some sequence of those mechanical operations, but it's really about how those mechanical operations organize themselves as a system, and it's the higher order system that gives us a perspective on those functional parts. The systems view, I think, is not just deterministic, although it's compatible with determinism, but it can't be just purely deterministic because things like probability, things like quantum mechanics, things like chaos theory give the systems view reasons for being skeptical that there can be perfect predictions, and therefore that there's a sort of mechanical constraint on what we can know about their actions. Like, if you really believe Laplace's demon exists and Laplace's demon can tell me exactly what I'm going to have for lunch 40 years from now or whatever, can tell me if I'm going to be alive 40 years from now and then what I'm going to have for lunch on a Tuesday in April, and can tell me all of those things with exact precision. If Laplace's demon can do that, then it seems like I don't have free will. But if Laplace's demon is impossible in this world because it violates chaos theory and it violates the probabilistic structure of the universe that we know from quantum mechanics, then those kinds of far-off predictions aren't so threatening. In fact, if we're complex enough, then you can't make really strong predictions very far out in the future at all. And so even if the universe is deterministic in some sense, that determinism simply doesn't matter. From a purely scientific standpoint, it doesn't matter for predicting what people are going to do because it's just too complicated. The systems are just too complicated. There's too many possibilities that even if it is deterministic, you're not going to know what's going to happen. And if you're not going to know what's going to happen, then all these paradoxes of fate and determinism seem to go away. All the worry about the determinism that the free will debate brings up, it sort of just vanishes if we admit that determinism. First of all, the determinism doesn't mean perfect prediction, and second of all, that things are so complex that you might never know what's going to happen. From this perspective, then maybe what free will is, it's not a violation of physics, and it really doesn't have anything to do with physics. What it is a way of marking our own ignorance and our own failure to know what happens in the future. Like, you can't predict the future with perfect probability because it's too complicated. And so because we can't predict the future, we have to make guesses, we have to imagine scenarios, we have to have these sort of imaginative leaps into the unknown, the sort of garden forking paths, because that's the only way that we're ever going to get a handle on the vast possibilities that lie before us. But that doesn't mean those possibilities really exist in any way that violates physics. It just means that these are sort of simplifying frames to help us understand what's going on. Okay, so on my perspective, the free will debate just goes away on the systems view. That there's no longer a debate over whether the will is free. On the systems view, the free will debate goes away, first of all, because the mind and the brain doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in terms of beliefs and desires and intentions. Instead, it works in terms of these complex mechanisms of control and feedback. So on the modern systems view, your brain is not the source of action. Your brain is the control system that's controlling all the other actions from your bodies. Your body has a lot of potential for acting in different ways, and your brain is it's not the control system, there are lots of control systems in your body. Maybe your lymphatic system is a different control system. Most of the control systems in your body, though, are chemical, involve certain chemicals in your bloodstream, sort of flowing through your body, and putting chemicals in your bloodstream is effective in changing your action, but it's also pretty slow. Chemistry is fairly slow. Like if a gland puts some hormones in my blood, but then I have to wait a few minutes for the blood to pump around my body and for that hormone to get for different parts of my body to have access to that hormone, or to use that hormone for whatever other process they need. So the blood supply is kind of slow. Plants don't move very much because they're mostly working on this kind of fluid mechanics of how much fluid is in one place versus another. Animals, the reason that animals are fast, the reason that animals are sensitive is because we got these fancy brains, and the brains are electrical. They're not merely chemical. They're neurochemical. There are parts of it that are chemical, but it's also electrical. And the electrical signals move very, very fast. Electrical signals can allow you to contract and expand muscles in ways that allow you to move around. And this is something that's only becomes possible because of the kind of control that the brain has over the rest of the body. Again, this is an electrical control. It's that the brain is controlling electrical signals, and those electrical signals are stimulating muscles to contract and expand. They're stimulating other parts of the body to engage in other kinds of operations. You have a bunch of neurons in your brain and all throughout your body, nerves that are passing signals around. And those signals give you a kind of control. I think the proper way of thinking about freedom is to think about control, not to think about determinism, but to think about control. And control is just the capacity to change the state of, or change some property or change some state. The example of control that comes from cybernetics, and I talked about this in the machine video, but the example of control that comes from cybernetics is of a feedback mechanism. So control to cybernetics, to the cyberneticist, control is just an ability to influence some parameter. So a simple control system is something like a thermostat controlling the temperature in a room. So there's a thermostat. The thermostat can sense the temperature in the room, and then from that sensation, from that input, it can decide whether to turn on the air conditioner or to turn on the heater. If it turns on the air conditioner, then the temperature goes down. If it turns on the heater, then the temperature goes up. And what's important about this as a control system is that the effects, the impact of those changes are something that the system can also sense and continue responding to. So a thermostat like this, you can give it a temperature. Say I don't want it to get hotter than 75 degrees and colder than 68 degrees or something like that. So I can tell the thermostat to keep the temperature in this range, and the thermostat has control over certain kinds of processes that change temperature. So the control is over the temperature. The temperature is the parameter. The temperature goes up and down. And it goes down when the air conditioner is on, and it goes up when the radiator is on. So this is the ways that it's controlling the temperature. And the thermostat has control over the temperature because it can initiate processes that have an impact on the temperature, and this control is cybernetic control because this is a feedback process. It's not just that the thermostat senses the temperature and then changes something, but that it monitors those changes and uses them to inform future action. So when the temperature gets too hot, the thermostat will turn the air conditioner on and then drop it back into the range that's appropriate. And then once it senses that it's in that range, it can turn the air conditioner off again so it stays in that range. And it can sort of, when it goes above or below, it can knock it back into that temperature range. So this is a control mechanism. It's a control mechanism because this system, if it's operating properly and all the parts are hooked up properly, then this system can keep the temperature within a certain range. 75 to 68 to 75 degrees. On a summer day in New Jersey, maybe my room would not stay in this very comfortable range. On a summer day in Jersey, it would get a lot hotter than that. but I can control the temperature inside the room because I have this little mechanism that's keeping the temperature range within a certain capacity, or keeping the temperature within a certain range. To do that, it needs effectors. It needs mechanical processes that do things like air conditioner that's blowing cold air out, or a radiator that's heating up the room. Right. So you need other functional parts that are able to do certain kinds of activities. So it's not the air conditioner that's controlling the room. It's the thermostat that's controlling the room, or maybe the whole system, the whole air conditioning system that's controlling the room. Because there's this sensation, change or action, and then feedback, and it's this whole closed circle of feedback that makes this a control system. Is the thermostat free? Well, it's not the thermostat that's free, it's the temperature that's free. I can change, I can set the temperature, the high end of the temperature and the low end of the temperature anywhere I want. So where I'm setting that parameter. Now, if I set the parameter too high, then maybe the radiator can't get hot enough to reach temperatures that high, or if I set it too low, maybe the air conditioner can't get low enough, or maybe there's leaks in the building and so on that are impacting these sorts of things. So what's free in this cybernetics discussion, the free thing is the parameter. The parameter is free. I can adjust the parameter wherever I want. It's not that the thermostat's free. The thermostat might just be a little piece of metal, a little bimetallic strip that bends in certain ways to turn on or off the air conditioner. If you're just looking at that piece of metal, it's an entirely mechanical thing that's being described by entirely deterministic laws. Maybe there's statistical laws because it's thermodynamics, but there's still deterministic laws that greatly constrain the activity of the thing. No one thinks that a thermostat is a living, breathing, conscious organism. No one thinks that thermostats have rational control in the sense that humans have rational control. What the thermostat has is a network of effectors and sensors that allow it to make systematic changes in the environment in ways that control some parameter. So what's being controlled here is the parameter. It's the parameter that's free and that we can move however we want. The number of degrees of... So sometimes engineers talk about degrees of freedom, and the degrees of freedom are just the number of different parameters that we have control over. So the cybernetics idea is that you are a big control system composed of lots of smaller control systems. They're control systems in the sense that they all have control over different parameters. My body temperature, my body has control over my temperature, my internal temperature, and it can make that go up or down. Sometimes when I'm exercising, my body temperature goes up, and then my body does things like sweat in order to bring the temperature back down. And my body has control over all sorts of things. My digestive processes, how fast my heart's beating, all of these things are parameters that the body has control over. And the body's, and you're free insofar as you actually have control over these parameters. You are free. Maybe the cyberneticist would not say that you're free. Maybe the cyberneticist would say that these parameters are free, insofar as you have control over them, insofar as there's a feedback mechanism that is able to adjust those parameters in various ways. So like one of my parameters is the time I go to bed, bedtime. To some extent I can control bedtime, like I can stay up later, I can go to bed earlier. Some extent I have control over my bedtime, but at some point my brain is just going to give out and force me to go to bed. It's probably coming up pretty soon. So what counts as control and what counts as free depends not just on whether it's determined, but depends on the exact structure of the mechanism. Sometimes you have mechanisms set up so that certain parameters are not let free because you need them to be very exact. And sometimes you have parameters that are free and can be adjusted. So thermostat, maybe I can adjust. Maybe there's other things that I can't adjust in terms of the house. The water pressure, for instance, maybe that's not a parameter that I have free control over because the water has to be at a certain rate for it to work at all. So I don't have control of the water pressure. I do have control of the temperature. Neither of these things have anything to do with freedom in an ultimate metaphysical sense. The control here is just control to change that parameter. And you can explain that control in entirely mechanistic terms. So maybe this is a kind of deterministic view, but it's also a kind of compatibilist view, because we can talk about control. And maybe... So to go back, to Dennett, maybe this is the kind of compatibilism that Dennett wants, is a kind of control, and a control over parameters that we care about, like slavery and torture. Like if we can control torture so that it doesn't happen, by setting up certain kinds of social mechanisms or certain kinds of bureaucratic or institutional processes that stop slavery from happening or stop torture from happening, then we can control it. And in this sense, we can be free. We can be free in the way that's important. Freedom from slavery, freedom in the sense that we can control that it happens or whether it happens. Right. So these are all freedoms that are worth wanting. This is sort of compatibilism. But this is sort of a cheap compatibilism. It's compatibilism without a lot of theoretical overhead to describe how it's possible that we're compatibilists. Right? In this video, we saw Locke and Frankfurt and Kant all give these very elaborate theoretical frameworks for thinking about how it's possible for us to be free in a deterministic world. And the Dennett view here is, in some sense, it's a compatibilist view, but in some sense, it's just a rejection of the terms of the free will debate. That it's really not about how do we reconcile with determinism, because determinism really isn't the problem. Determinism isn't really a problem for control or not. We can still talk about machines that are deterministic and yet still exert control. The thermostat is a deterministic process. It'll behave the same way every single time, and yet still the thermostat has a certain amount of control and freedom over the parameter of temperature. So this is a way of backing out of the discussion. So the plan is to talk about Dennett's views in more detail in the final lecture. So we're going to talk about politics next, and then Dennett's views and functionalism last. But I just want to say one brief thing about how I think the cybernetics view has to approach freedom, and I'll say more about this in the last video. But so this is from Dennett. Dennett tries to give an explanation of consciousness and intentionality. He also gives theories of the will. He talks a lot about evolution. And he's trying to give a theory of the mind that's not just compatible with, but really grounded in evolutionary theory and neuroscience. And the way that he does this is with a particular kind of approach to explanation or philosophy of science. So we've looked at a couple of different kinds of explanations, the Aristotelian, the mechanical, and systems view. And we've been sort of assuming up to this point that one of these views is right and maybe the others are wrong, or maybe they're all right in some way or there's some way of making them compatible. But maybe the issue is the attempts to explain things at all. So what Dennett offers is a way of thinking about explanation, about what an explanation is. Maybe even this is what a metaphysics is. And that what an explanation is that it's an interpretive stance. That it's a way of it's a way of interpreting certain phenomena or relating certain phenomena or understanding how they're interact with each other. And the thing about these stances is that there's lots of different ones, and the different stances might be incompatible, but they also might be useful for some purposes over others. So Dennett himself talks about three kinds of stances. The first one he calls the physical stance, the second the design stance, and then finally the intentional stance. So the physical stance is when we treat something like a purely physical, mechanical process, acting according to purely physical laws. So maybe we treat the rock rolling down the hill as a purely physical process. And this is how a lot of physics and science treats the world, as this physical process. But maybe we don't always treat things physically. Maybe some things we treat from a design perspective. So my phone is a physical object. It obeys physical laws of electricity and heat and so on. So my phone is a physical object, but I don't always think of it as merely a physical object. I also think about it as a tool that's useful for certain things and that was designed to do certain things. Like the phone was designed to make calls, and the phone was designed to communicate wirelessly. And here's the thing. I don't really know all the details of those physical processes. When I was in college as a computer science major, I remember learning something about Wi-Fi protocols or like cellular phone protocols. But I don't really know the details of that, and I certainly couldn't tell you the physics of how they pull off these radio antennas in the phone, or Wi-Fi antennas. So although I know it's a physical object, and I know you could explain it physically, I tend to explain it not from a physical perspective, but from a design perspective, understanding that it's a designed artifact that was built to do some functions, that was built for some purpose. It was built by an intelligent person to do purpose. A bunch of engineers designed it to do certain things. And by understanding it as a design object for some purposes or others, I'm able to interact with it in lots of other ways, even when I don't know the full physical description. So physical and design stance are different stances, different interpretive stances that I might take towards the very same object. And the point is that these different stances give us different theoretical resources, conceptual resources for explanation, and those resources might be more useful in some circumstances versus the other. So is the phone really physical? Well, yes. Is it really designed? Well, yes. But these two different stances might yield different results, especially because I don't know all the physical details. I might not also not know all the design details. And this opens up another way of treating objects or way of explaining objects, which is with an intentional stance. So what Dennett says is that the mind, and again, I'm going to explain this more in the last video, is that the mind, the way that we think about the mind is really the result of a particular kind of interpretive stance we take towards minds. So in the same way that I can treat the phone as a physical object or as a design object, I can also treat the phone as an intentional object, as having intentions, as having wants and needs. So for instance, sometimes my phone starts downloading updates to the apps, right? So apps go out of date, the phone needs to update the apps, and the phone does it by itself. And I might think that the phone is updating right now because it wants, I might say something like the phone is going slow right now because it wants to update its apps. And here I'm thinking about the phone as having certain kinds of desires and interests and beliefs about the world. It recognized that the app was out of date, and so it wants to update before we actually use the app. Here I'm talking about the phone's desires, and that doesn't mean I really think the phone has desires, but it's a convenient shortcut. It's convenient shorthand for thinking about the phone doing this really complicated task. And it's because the task is so complicated that I need to use this more sophisticated kind of theoretical machinery. And for Dennett, this is what the mind is. The mind is sophisticated explanatory machinery for thinking about really complicated things like people and like animals that are behaving in ways that require a lot more theoretical nuance. Dennett's going to say that, look, an animal and a human they're physical objects. Maybe they're designed by evolution in some sense, and so this is why they act in these functionally understandable ways. But sometimes, even in terms of evolutionary design, it's hard to explain why people act the way they do or why animals act the way they do. And in these cases, we appeal to their mind, to their thoughts and feelings and preferences and desires and so on. And it's that explanation in terms of a mind. So the point here is that a mind is not a thing in the world, it's an interpretive stance that we take towards the world, just like the physical and design stance. It's a stance we take towards the world, and so in some sense it's a fiction, it's a narrative. So this is what I'm going to close on. It's just this idea of fictionalism. This is, I think, the approach that I would want to take towards free will, is that free will is a useful narrative, it's a useful fiction that we tell ourselves. Maybe this seems a little bit like the determinist perspective, but I think this is also kind of what the libertarians and the compatibilists say, that we use fictions, we use narratives to explain our world, to interpret our world. We use narratives to explain our world. These narratives work both in the real world, but also in fiction. And in fact, our theories can work in fiction just fine in some cases. So like I can ask you a question like, which Marvel characters died when in the Thanos snap? And there's a right answer to that question. There's a wrong answer to that question. Right? So, Spider-Man died. If you said Spider-Man didn't die, then you would have been wrong. But the thing is that this is weird because it's a fictional world. It's entirely make-believe. But even though it's make-believe, there's still an internal logic to that world. I mean, we can pretend, for the sake of argument, that this world is real, and we can ask questions about the world, like what color is Captain America's hair. I mean, Captain America is not a real creature, is not a real person. There's no actual person named Captain America. But there's a fictional world in which Captain America exists, and within that world, you can ask certain kinds of questions. You can get genuine answers, and there might even be true or false answers. Right? Captain America does not have purple hair. Captain America's fictional creature doesn't actually exist, but in the fictional world that Captain America exists, Captain America does not have purple hair. Right? So you can take these interpretive stances towards fictions or not. You might think of the interpretive stance itself as a kind of fiction, as a kind of perspective. Like in this perspective, we're entertaining the Marvel universe and pretending it exists. And maybe later on we switch to a different context where we're not pretending the world exists anymore. And if someone asks me, does Captain America exist? I would say, of course he doesn't exist. But then, so the idea is that we can switch between these perspectives. We can switch between these interpretive stances almost at will. And moreover, we do it all the time. This is not a rare thing. It's actually quite common for us to switch our explanatory framework as and when needed. So sometimes we will explain our phone as a physical object, but sometimes we'll explain it as a designed object, and sometimes we'll explain it as mind. And we can sort of fluidly switch between these. In different stances, the kinds of questions we can ask and answer might change, and they might even be incompatible answers. Right, when I'm using an intentional stance, I can say that the phone wants to do certain things. But then if I'm using a physical stance, it'd be silly to say the phone wants to do certain things. But maybe also if I'm talking about my brain from a physical stance, it would also be silly to say that I want certain things, because there's no wants there, there's just neurons firing. The idea is that there's no preferred perspective of explanation. There's no ultimate explanation. There's just a bunch of different explanations. To some extent, all of these explanations are fictional in the sense that we can adopt them or choose to adopt them or not to adopt them. But we do this for particular reasons. Some things are useful, some stances are useful, and some stances are not useful. Like maybe what happens during the scientific revolution is that we figure out that there's a better way of understanding the natural world than the essentialist way. It's not just that essentialism is wrong or that Aristotle was wrong in some absolute sense, but just that we have better theories now. That the theories that they had, they worked maybe well enough for their purposes, but we have better theories now that don't make those same mistakes and don't fall into the same traps. And maybe free will is also like the same sort of thing. Maybe it's a fiction that's useful for some purposes, especially if you're trying to figure out what you should do with your life. But maybe free will is not a very useful thing for explaining how the brain works. Maybe it's not a useful thing for understanding the relationship between consciousness and the physical world. Maybe all of that stuff is taking the fiction of freedom outside of the domain where it actually applies. So I don't want to be conservative about the concepts. I sort of want to be liberal about this, but I want to say that they're all sort of fictional, and they all should be used with a pragmatic mindset that use them when they're useful, abandon them when they're not useful, and don't be too committed to any of them. Be willing to play around and switch between perspectives as and when necessary. So with this in mind about the utility of freedom, we've talked a lot about whether we're free and what freedom amounts to and different views of free will, but we might step back here and think about why we want the concept of freedom anyway. Like, what purpose is it serving for us? We've talked about using the concept of freedom to justify certain kinds of moral actions, holding people accountable, throwing people in jail, and so on. We've also talked about freedom to understand certain kinds of psychological issues, like about the relationship between desire and action, about how much control we have over our actions, about the differences between humans and animals, say, and maybe the differences between humans and robots. But we also use freedom to organize our political institutions. We build governments around the idea of freedom. We structure laws around the idea of protecting freedom, of punishing people, of determining who's responsible for certain kinds of actions with court trials and so on. So these concepts of freedom has a lot of impact on sort of all levels of our metaphysical structure, from deep explanations of the causal structure of the world all the way through ethics and politics. But at what cost do we gain these conceptual uses? There might be drawbacks to the concept of freedom generally. For one thing, maybe the too much focus on freedom, too much focus on autonomy, makes us start to believe that we are more independent and more isolated than we really are. Maybe it's a kind of overemphasis of freedom that brings Americans to build suburban landscapes where everyone is isolated in their own house and there's not a lot of public transportation or public interaction because everyone has their own individual house and their individual yard and so on. And maybe that kind of individualism is the result of an overemphasis, too much theory, emphasizing free action and individual freedom. I'm not saying individual freedom is bad. I'm just saying that maybe there's a consequence of too much of an overemphasis on this kind of freedom. Maybe there's also consequences for the way that free will promotes a kind of antagonism between science and common sense explanations, or maybe even government explanations. Maybe the emphasis on freedom or free will that outstrips determinism makes people susceptible to believing in things like miracles or other kinds of unexplained actions. I think a lot of people believe in free will in ways that make them dismiss science or reject science, or think that there's some things that just can't be explained. Consciousness, a lot of people will just straight up say that consciousness can never be explained by science without really looking at what science can do to explain consciousness, or without really looking at what the facts are. But there's sort of a idea about the limitations of knowledge. And maybe promoting that kind of idea is not such a good thing. Maybe also just the way that we talk about freedom results in bad political institutions. Maybe the way that we vote and the way that we elect senators and so on. Maybe the way that we try criminals. Maybe the jury of your peers. Maybe all these things make sense from a perspective of freedom, but are actually really bad for society and bad for people, and that we should not build governing institutions around these concepts. Maybe it looked good a couple of hundred years ago when these debates were really live and active, but maybe now we can do better. This is just supposed to be suggestive. Again, we're going to come back to this next time. In the next video, I will give a long discussion about justice and autonomy as political notions. But I've been talking for almost 4 hours now. I apologize for this. It's really unreasonable. But I'm going to go ahead and post this video. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. There's free will for you. Bye.